Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Marvel. I have chat system and become Batman's teacher at start. Chapter 21. Peter Parker has been very happy during this time. Since he was bitten by the spider, he has acquired unparalleled superpowers. Now he is no longer the powerless otaku, but has become powerful, endless and athletic. This is really a good thing for a high school student. But he was not without troubles. The doctor who had been chatting with him online arranged a thoughtful physical examination for their family, but this physical examination revealed many problems. There is nothing wrong with Peter. He is very healthy, and the hospital's machine has not found anything special about him. The problem is his uncle and aunt, old Parker and Aunt May. After all, they are old, and there will always be some problems, but this is not a problem. But in the test results, the doctor told Peter that his uncle had lung cancer. A piece of shadow, which is not good news. Anyone with a little common sense knows that the next sentence of this sentence may be either cancer or tumor. The doctor suggested Ben Parker to do a comprehensive lung examination, but this is not cheap, especially considering the possibility of an open cavity biopsy in the later stage. The Parker family simply cannot afford the operation fee. Although medical expenses will be reimbursed, the cost of such inspections is not on the reimbursement list, and no insurance company will be responsible. If the doctor Peter met online is still working in this hospital, then maybe Peter can ask him for help. Even if he can't do it in this good hospital, he can go to a slightly worse hospital, where it will be cheaper. Life in the Parker family has always been tight, and Peter often doesn't have a new dress all year round. But Peter also knows that his uncle and aunt have done their best to provide him with the best possible life. After all, they earn so little, and Uncle Ben never fails. Unwilling to get a penny of ill-gotten gains, with a meager dead salary, and to pay Peter to study, there is really nothing left. Ben Parker is very open. The shadow of the lungs does not mean that it must be cancerous or tumor. Maybe it is just some irrelevant inflammation, and he will recover by himself. He comforted Peter and said that it may just be an alarmist from a big hospital, but Peter was really sad. He couldn't help but feel a sense of complaining. Thompson, who always bullied him at school, could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for a pair of sneakers on his feet, but their family couldn't even pay hundreds of dollars for the inspection fee. But Peter thought, the situation will be different now. With this superpower, what can he do without making money? Of course, Peter is very smart. He used his nimble little brain to figure out the fastest way to make money, and that is to participate in underground boxing matches. Of course, it might be faster to go to the casino to play poker, but Peter knew that his sensing ability was sometimes ineffective, and if he played erratically, not only would he not be able to make money, he might even lose money. But underground boxing is different. His strength is enough to defeat any ordinary person, no matter how cruel they are. Absolute suppression of strength will definitely make him invincible. Where in New York is the most prosperous underground boxing industry? Of course it's Hell's Kitchen. But Peter, as a good student who has been studying hard since childhood, would not go near such a chaotic place. Therefore, perhaps out of fear or out of caution, Peter wandered around Hell's Kitchen for several days, still didn't go in. Finally one day, when Peter came home from school, he learned that his aunt had twisted his waist, but he had no money to buy medicine, so he could only lie in bed and rest. Turning into anger, he really wanted to beat up a few people. He put on the self-made mask, although it looked funny, but after getting the power of the spider, his body became a little stronger, and he was no longer so skinny, so he looked good. He rammed around in Hell's Kitchen like a headless fly, but no one could beat him anyway. He also had spider sense, which could be used to avoid bullets, and he finally found the doorway. On Beale Street, which is about 2 blocks away from Mary Street in Hell's Kitchen, there is an underground boxing ring run by gangsters. After Peter knocked out the strongest black boxer there, he was spotted by the supervisor there and recommended. Go to the biggest underground boxing ring at the end of the street to fight. And here, Peter gave himself a code name called Spider-Man. It all happened very smoothly. Peter won consecutively. Few fighters could stand his set of chaotic punches. The power brought by the spider mutation was too powerful. In just a few days, Peter won to tens of thousands of dollars. The words are divided. Daredevil lay in Schiller for a few days. After all, he has no superpowers, and the speed of wound healing is the same as that of ordinary people. However, Fortunately, the assassin who killed him was obviously merciful, and the bullet did not hurt. Vital organs. Matt was much better after laying down for a few days. So that night, Matt said goodbye to Schiller. He had to continue to do his righteous cause. If he stopped because of Jin Bing's assassination, that would be his wish. So instead of stopping his actions of upholding justice, Matt has to give Kim a blow. His target is Beale Street, where 2 nightclubs, a casino, an underground boxing ring, and an illegal car modification shop are all owned by Jinbing. It can be said that this street is controlled by the Jinbing gang, bringing him millions of dollars in profits. Matt's first target is the underground boxing ring. But don't forget how his father died. This kind of underground black boxing ring has no need to exist at all. They just want to make money from those rotten gamblers, and don't care about anyone's life, Matt's father, just because he wanted to. Bringing a winning performance to his son, but refusing to fake the match, the banker lost money and was brutally killed by the gang. This also led to the birth of Daredevil. Therefore, Matt would never let go of any underground boxing arena. In fact, the underground black boxing gambling industry of Jinbing had been severely weakened by Matt. This is also the reason why Jinbing will send him an assassin. If Matt is not dead, Jinbing will never think about making money with black fists. Of course, Matt is a seasoned hero. He didn't rush into that black boxing arena. The most common method he used to dismantle these underground organizations was to observe for a few days, and then find a drunken drunk who came out of there to drink from their mouths. Get all the information he wants, and then catch a few managements to focus on attacking, and disrupt the opening several times, and those gamblers will look elsewhere. After observing for a few days, Matt learned the name, Spider-Man, from many people, and learned that he has recently made a splash on the field. Matt has also seen Spider-Man once, but only he missed it in a hurry, but he knew that this kid's good days would not last long. On this day, the owner of the underground boxing stadium found Peter, and he wanted Peter to fight fake matches. Anyone who has a certain understanding of this kind of betting rules knows that Peter's odds will become very low with such a winning streak. Everyone will buy him to win, and few people will buy his opponent. At this time, if Peter loses, then the banker only needs to pay a few people who bought his opponent to win, and take away the money of all the people who bought Peter to win, which is a huge fortune. The underground boxing ring is actually such a business. There is no fair competition here. Everything is the bookmaker manipulating the odds and using it to win the money of those who gamble. The owner of the underground casino promised to give Peter a share, but Peter was not very happy. First, he felt that he had earned enough money. Tens of thousands of dollars were enough for Uncle Ben to do a complete set of examinations, even Aunt May's waist needed it. That's enough money for major surgery. In addition, Peter is only a high school student after all, his mind is immature, and the thrill of consecutive victories makes him unable to stop. For an adolescent boy, if you let them deliberately lose to their opponents, it is simply difficult to achieve God. Peter finally raised his eyebrows, and he quit. The boss of the underground boxing ring didn't say anything, so Peter naively thought that the other party couldn't do anything about him. After all, he has such powerful strength, how could ordinary people beat him? All this was seen by Daredevil Matt. He sneaked in here early in the morning as a drunk, pretending to be drunk and paralyzed in the auditorium. His extraordinary hearing allowed him to hear the conversation between the boss of the underground boxing ring and Peter backstage without a word. And the next day, Matt was there. When Peter came on stage, there were still countless cheers from below. Peter raised his hands to greet them, ready to wait for the next defeat of his men. A strong black boxer came up. Peter looked at him with a sly smile on his face. He didn't understand what was going on. When he first started punching, Peter felt that it was okay. He almost knocked the boxer out with one punch, but the boxer didn't fight head-on, but ducked and seemed to be dragging time. Soon, Peter felt something was wrong. His stomach began to cramp, his legs were weak, and his eyes were dark. Just when he was unconscious, the black boxer punched him on the cheek, and Peter stumbled back a few steps, dizzy. The boxer on the other side is chasing after the victory. The moment Peter was hit, his spider sense rang. He felt that the boxer on the opposite side had a heavy lead in the glove. If he was hit like this, his brain will fly out. Peter bent down, barely dodging the blow, and the audience below booed. Spider-Man would never dodge in previous games. Peter couldn't take care of that much anymore. He was so uncomfortable that he could hardly breathe. The boxer on the opposite side punched him again. Peter was directly knocked to the ground, and this is not a regular competition field. There are no decent referees. After falling to the ground, the fist of the boxer still fell like raindrops, and no one came to stop it. Peter could only hold his head tightly, but the lead-filled fist hit him, making him feel that his internal organs were about to shift. In the end, he couldn't hold back and lay on the ground, vomit, a loud spit came out, and the audience below erupted in abuse. Knowing that he might lose his money, the audience's scolding became more and more harsh. The dirty words that Peter had never heard in his life were thrown out of their mouths and thrown on Spider-Man. Before Peter passed out, he saw a figure, jumped up from the audience, a crutch slapped the opposite boxer's neck with a whirring sound, and the fierce beating finally stopped. But Peter couldn't hold on any longer and fainted. Peter woke up again and found himself in a cramped and dimly lit hut. He saw a man in a red tights turning his back and sorting out his equipment. Peter was still in pain all over his body, but because of his extraordinary self-healing ability, most of the wounds had healed. The man turned his head and said, "Boy, you're lucky, they just gave you some laxatives and anesthesia. Use something more powerful, or you won't wake up now." Spider-Man's mutation ability does not reach its peak at the beginning, but requires a series of training and stimulation. The later Spider-Man, whether it is strength, speed or self-healing ability, is several times stronger than the current Peter, 10 times. And although Peter has acquired the mutation ability for a while, he has to deal with ordinary people. Now that his ability is much stronger than ordinary people, he certainly doesn't think about how to improve his ability. Because of this, his physical function has not yet reached the level where he can be completely immune to drugs. The boss of the underground boxing stadium gave him a lot of laxatives, and combined with some anesthetics, he let him go. Peter said, "I remember you. You saved me, right? It's your own destiny, boy, and it seems that you have some abilities that are different from ordinary people, otherwise you would be dead now." Peter is also in a cold sweat. You can't expect a high school student to be very wary of people. Peter lives in a place where people are simple and friendly, and the neighborhood is kind. The same is true for Uncle Ben. He has always focused on positive education. Peter has never seen any sinister people. He said with lingering fear, "I thought." Then he slammed the bed hard and said angrily, "I'm going to go back and teach that boss a lesson. How dare he give me medicine? You don't really expect that there will be fair judges like in the World Championships, right?" Daredevil asked. "Okay, I think your injury is almost healed. Hurry up and get out of here, little brat. Hell's Kitchen is not the place you should be." "I'm not a little kid," Peter said, "I'm Spider-Man." "You're still a long way off," Daredevil said, and Peter was about to retort when a crutch stopped beside his neck with a gust of wind. And the spider sensor didn't respond, or didn't have time to respond at all. Peter's cold sweat dripped down his forehead, and Daredevil's movements were so fast that his extraordinary vision couldn't catch it. What Matt learned from the old man was not a triangular cat kung fu martial arts. Although he was just an ordinary person, his data had almost reached the limit that an ordinary person could achieve. Combined with thousands of martial arts, it is even stronger than the little spider who awakened the spider power. Peter was just a fledgling boy. He swallowed and said, "Your trick is so handsome, man, I think you used this trick to save me." Speaking of Peter making a boxing stance with his hands swaying from side to side, Daredevil put away his crutches and said, "If you really want to be Spider-Man, there is still a lot to learn. If you are interested in this, you can come here. Find me here." Daredevil is not a bad guy either. He is a very decisive hero in the Marvel Universe. He saved Peter not only out of sympathy, but partly because of his memory of his father's death. Hope someone else die like this in the underground ring. But for the other part, he also planned to find an assistant for himself. He was assassinated and injured that day, which made him realize that he could not be split in half by himself, and he could not seek justice while avoiding the pursuit of the enemy. Having an assistant makes things a lot easier. The little spider met his expectations very well. He was very capable and talented, but he was very young and didn't understand anything. In this way, Peter began to come to Daredevil every once in a while, and he also realized that although he was very powerful, his skills were too poor, and he had too little experience in all aspects of dealing with people, otherwise why would he go underground to make money? Woolen cloth. With such a martial art, how much money is not easy to capture. Out of the desire to use his abilities to improve his life, and the envy of a young man for Daredevil's cool martial arts, Peter soon became more and more familiar with Daredevil and also understood what he was doing. Although Peter admired him very much, he felt it was unnecessary. How much could he do alone? He couldn't kill the criminals in Hell's Kitchen alone. With this kind of perseverance, if he had done something else, he would have started a family and a happy life long ago. But soon, as Spider-Man and Daredevil became more and more familiar, he even stayed at Daredevil's quarters for several nights during the vacation. He had seen Daredevil bandaging his wounds alone countless times. His attitude is starting to falter more and more. Daredevil is really just an ordinary person. He has no super self-healing ability, and unfortunately, he is more sensitive to the experience of pain than ordinary people, so every time he was injured and bandaged the wound alone at the station, it could be seen that he was about to faint from the pain, but the next day, he went out to fight criminals as usual. Although Hell's Kitchen is not as dangerous as Gotham, I want to do justice here. The injuries may be too great. Sometimes I get hit by stray bullets in the fire of the gang, and sometimes I jump from several floors to avoid the pursuit, and also suffered a close fight, leaving a large bruise. Every time the Spider saw these wounds, he had a complicated emotion. He already regarded Matt as a friend in his heart. Of course he didn't want his friend to get hurt, but how could he dissuade Daredevil? Discourage him from seeking justice. Don't fight criminals. But Peter is very smart. He understands that even these unbearable wounds can't dissuade Matt. How can he stop him with a few words of lightness? Finally one day, Matt was once again shot by the ninja who was chasing him and shot him in the calf. Peter helped him to take the bullet out. Peter had never seen such a wound, the pungent smell of blood, it made his brain dizzy, and the torn muscles were even deep into the bones, and Peter's uncomfortable hands were shaking. He is not the Spider-Man who has been tempered with iron and blood and become a real hero. No high school student will be any better than him when he sees such a scene. With a dry voice from his throat, he said, "Why on earth are you doing this? Is it really worth it? I thought you would ask me earlier." Daredevil leaned against the wall. He changed his position. His voice trembled a little because of the pain. He said, "It can be seen that although your family situation is ordinary, you should have an elder who loves you. I have a pretty happy family, and I have lived a very stable life since I was a child. It may be unsatisfactory at school, but most of the time it is safe. I can see that you are complaining about the lack of money, but you know that you are really lucky enough." In the dimly lit hut, Daredevil murmured intermittently like a dreamer. "Actually, I was also very lucky. I was born in Hell's Kitchen, but my father was not a gambler or a drug addict. He tried his best to protect me and let me have a chance to get out of this hellish place and go outside to read. He is a great father. In order to support me and get me out of here, he chose to become a black boxer. Yes, your end should have been the same as him. He refused to play fake matches when I went to watch him fight, so he was killed by the bosses who opened the boxing ring." Peter's psychological and physical distress made him almost unaware that he was crying. Daredevil's already painful consciousness was a little sluggish, but he continued to chant. "You and I are very lucky, and some people are unfortunate. When their mothers were pregnant with them, they either drank or took drugs. They were born with drug addiction. In order to survive, they either went to work for gangsters or went to work some of the more dangerous, dehumanizing jobs where they continued to be addicted to drugs and alcohol because their lives are so miserable, and their children are repeating their lives. Quote. This is Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, I am very lucky to have the opportunity to leave here to receive higher education and practice martial arts. Since I am more fortunate than them, I have gained more and have greater abilities than them. Quote. Then why don't I do this? Daredevil often calls Hell's Kitchen this hellish place, and Peter has heard them scolding those people countless times, cursing everyone in this place to go to quickly. But for the first time, he knew that Daredevil really wanted to save this place. He really had a firm determination to bring Hell's Kitchen out of hell. Peter really couldn't imagine that he was already in this kind of environment. How could he still think about saving this kind of place? It's simply impossible. But Daredevil still had to do it. Peter was silent. When he took out the bullet with his hand, Daredevil let out a scream of near death. Soon, he passed out with a pale face. Peter stood in the middle of the room. He looked at this somewhat shabby room, where even anesthetics and bandages could not be found. Matt's wounds could only be wrapped with strips of clothing. Peter developed a kind of anger, which was more violent and deep than when he complained about not having money. He felt that Matt should not be in this situation. He was clearly firm, persistent and persevering. And he is a good man, and a good man should be rewarded. Why do the bosses and shareholders of the underground boxing ring live so well, and even the drunkards who are drunk in their seats can get a good night's sleep? But a good person like Daredevil could only endure great pain, falling asleep painfully in this dark and cramped room. Based on Peter's experience, he still couldn't understand these questions, and these emotions stirred in his chest. He left Daredevil's quarters and ran in Hell's Kitchen late at night. Using his spider powers, he leaps on the top of the building, shuttles through the night sky of New York, and the neon lights of the casinos and nightclubs in the distance stay all night, and in contrast, these dark alleys are like never-ending. It will be like dawn, and it will be pitch black. Peter, who was running, suddenly heard a spider sensor, but he didn't have time to escape because of his confusion. A gold and red mecha rushed towards him quickly, hugged his waist, and then took him to the high speed. He flew a distance before, and then suddenly threw Peter to the ground. Peter was smashed, and the beautiful gold and red mecha hovered in midair. Spider-Man was shocked. He took off his hood, and a voice came from the receiver on the opposite side. Really? Let that guy be right, he's really a high school kid. Peter slammed the ground angrily. He said, I'm not a kid, I'm Spider-Man. The opposite Stark let out a disdainful snort and said, Spider-Man. Yes, you have a good reputation among the gamblers in Hell's Kitchen, and the only good thing you do is to help those people win a lot of money. Peter's anger almost broke through the sky. This strange robot attacked him as soon as he came up, threw him to the ground, and taunted him. Peter rushed over angrily, and Iron Man's mecha drew a graceful arc in the air, dodged the attack. Little Spider doesn't have any fighting skills now, let alone fights with any robots, and doesn't understand what tactical route calculation is. Naturally, there is nothing to do with the Mark V equipped with Jarvis. Spider-Man yelled, You robot, I'll show you what I'm capable of. Iron Man's mecha fell to the ground, and he said, Oh, is it? See how you defeated those unprofessional black boxers. Stark's mouth was still very poisonous, and the little spider's face turned blue and red when he mocked him. In the end, Stark seemed to have no interest in chatting with this little kid Peter, and he said indifferently, The children who haven't been weaned, go back to your home as soon as possible. New York is not a playground for you to jump up and down. Don't think that a place that is a little different from others, you can run around in the middle of the city, someone has already been eyeing you. Quote. Stark has no liking for the current little spider, especially knowing that he has abilities that are different from ordinary people, but only goes to the underground boxing arena to fight. In his opinion, this is really a very stupid behavior. Stark has his own pride. Although he is a little arrogant, stubborn, and sensitive, after experiencing the life and death crisis of kidnapping, the real Iron Man has awakened, so he despises Peter, who can only fool around. Peter stood up and threw his hood on the ground angrily. He said, You said I was running around in New York, but don't you do the same? His sanity recovered a little, so he said to Stark, Yes, you are wearing this mecha, I can see that this can't be a bargain, you have money to play this. But what about me? My uncles and aunts are not in good health. They can't even pay for the medical expenses for the examination. I need money very much, so why can't I go to the boxing ring to fight? I don't use this ability to hurt others. Quote. Stark crossed his arms and said, Have you ever thought that you have this ability, but if you don't save others, you are hurting others? Peter showed an absurd expression. He shook his head from side to side, as if he couldn't believe how the person on the other side could say such absurd words. He said, The ability I acquired by myself, what I want to do with it, just use it what to do, this is my ability, why can't I use him to do more for myself, but have to help others? The current Peter has not experienced the death of Ben Parker, and he still doesn't understand the meaning of the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, so he now believes that since he has this ability, of course you should do more for yourself. It can only be said that his thoughts are not wrong. Everyone lives for themselves, but Spider-Man is destined to only follow the path of a superhero. Peter's kindness and tenacity will grow with his age. And gradually inspired, he is destined to become a superhero. And Stark, although he is arrogant, he always has the idea of taking the world as his responsibility, and feels that as a super genius, it is his innate responsibility to protect ordinary people and the Earth. Stark could also see that Peter's excitement was abnormal at this time. I was afraid he had just been stimulated, so he said, I know you have a lot of problems now that you don't understand, and I used to be too. But there are some things you have to experience for yourself. After that, I can understand that this is not comparable to me telling you any great truth. I can only tell you that if you continue to uphold this idea, you will regret it one day. After speaking, Stark's mecha flew away, leaving Peter alone to sit there in a decadent and lost state. He really didn't understand why everyone was against him, as if he was a natural bad guy. Peter didn't understand why he seemed to suffer more than ever after he had superpowers. He earned the money, but he didn't dare to give it to Uncle Ben directly, because he wandered around at night, couldn't sleep well, and his academic performance declined, and he also ignored Gwen's feelings during the excitement period when he had just acquired the ability. Gwen was also in a cold war with him. He wanted to beat up his nemesis Thompson, but he didn't dare to fight in the school, so he could only swallow it. This superpower actually didn't bring him any great benefits. It didn't let him turn around overnight and live the kind of prosperous life he wanted. He didn't understand what the problem was. With the cold wind of New York night blowing, Spider-Man sat on the roof of the Hell's Kitchen building, thinking constantly. At this moment, his extraordinary hearing made him hear a whisper from the alley behind the building. It was the back door of a nightclub. There were originally 2 tall and strong bodyguards standing there. From this angle Peter was able to see them, but they couldn't see Peter. Peter saw a bald man in a jacket who seemed to be talking to his subordinates. Peter's eyesight and hearing were far beyond normal. He saw a target-like circular mark on the bald man's forehead. He heard the bald man, "Open your mouth and say, quote, ... As long as we step on the accelerator to the max before he reacts, you know, Andre has a good car there. He's modified it, and the speed is much faster than a normal car. As long as he stays still at the beginning and doesn't hear him, and hits him the moment he turns a corner, then he will be dead." His subordinate said, "I know that a junction at the end of Mary Street is very suitable. There are some construction waste piled up at the junction, and the oil smell of the car can also be masked in the past." The bald head showed an evil smile and said, "We have to kill him before that woman, so that Boss Kim Bing will understand who is his most powerful subordinate." Peter was listening to them talking upstairs. He learned from the conversation that they seemed to be planning to kill a person with a car, but Peter, who had just been educated by turns, thought very rebelliously, it had something to do with him. What relationship? It's just a fight between gangsters. Why should a gang member want to kill another gang member? Anyway, there are no good people in this Hell's Kitchen. Peter thought about it and walked back slowly. It was very late now. He told Uncle Ben that he would not go back tonight, so he went back to Daredevil's cabin again, and Daredevil was still sleeping soundly. Shen. Peter thought, maybe what he just thought was not quite right. There is still a good person in this Hell's Kitchen, that is this friend in front of him, and he is a little too good. Peter looked at the wound on his calf. There was still some blood oozing, and the bruise that Peter had just dropped by Iron Man was completely healed. Peter suddenly felt a little ridiculous. Daredevil was really an ordinary person, not like him at all. The same self-healing ability. That's why he was meddling with his own business, and he made himself so miserable. He wanted to learn Daredevil's martial arts, but he didn't want to learn his behavior at all. When he heard the group of gangsters talking just now, if he rushed down angrily to seek justice and tell them not to commit murder, then he would not stop tonight. There must be at least a dozen bodyguards in the nightclub. If you beat them down, the bald man might even take a beating. With so many people, if you accidentally hit them, it will hurt for a while. And the result is probably to prevent a gang riot. You reading www.uakanshu.com. But what is this good deed? There are no innocent people in Hell's Kitchen, only other gangsters are caught in the fire. Peter thought, why would he spend the night and risk getting hurt, doing this kind of nosy? Thinking like this, Peter slowly fell into sleep. In the dream, he used his ability to make a fortune and bought a house on the most prosperous street in Queens. Uncle Ben and Aunt May have both moved into new colleges and universities. In the house, they also hired a private doctor. Uncle Ben's illness has also recovered, and Aunt May seems to be 10 years younger, and their family has lived a very wealthy and happy life. The first half of this dream was very beautiful. Perhaps Peter heard Daredevil's painful moans at night, and the second half of the dream began to turn sharply. When Peter was out, a gangster broke into his big beautiful house. The gangsters killed his uncle and aunt and ransacked everything. Their neighbors saw the gangster, but no one was there. The police were called. After the police arrived, they failed to catch the murderer immediately. Peter became a ghost, wandering around the city every day, trying to find the murderer who broke his happy life, but there was no clue. In the end, in his dream, Daredevil appeared, and Peter went to question Daredevil. He fought so many criminals, why did he only miss those gangsters? And Daredevil said to him indifferently, "I'm afraid it's only you who can take full responsibility for this." Peter woke up in a cold sweat. It was just dawn in New York. The cold air came in from the crack in the window and got into his lungs. The cold made him have the urge to cry. Daredevil also woke up. Peter poured some water for him. Daredevil said, "Thank you, but I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you later to help me get some medicine back from the clinic at the end of Mary Street." Although it was said that he would go to get the medicine in a while, Peter still went in the afternoon, because Matt's leg had been bleeding a little, and he had to change several dressing methods. When it was done, it was already afternoon. Peter didn't have time to eat. He was very hungry. When he came to the clinic, he smelled a charming fragrance. When Schiller heard the doorbell, he came out and saw a big boy in a sweater standing at the door, sniffing hard, as if he wanted to inhale all the fragrance into his stomach. Schiller wiped his hands and said, "Come in." Peter scratched his head and said, "Good noon, sir, a friend of mine asked me to come here to get medicine. He said you know." "Oh, I know," Schiller said, "but after I finish eating, he shouldn't be in a hurry, right?" Peter said, "Fortunately, his blood has stopped, but the pain is a bit severe. He needs some painkillers." "Have you eaten yet?" Schiller asked. Peter blushed a little. He thought that maybe his eyes were too hot to look at the kitchen, and the doctor found out. Schiller said, "If you haven't eaten, just stay and eat, or you can bring back one for Matt." Quote. With that said, a little yellow creature ran to the table with a big bowl on it, still very humanely twitching his nose on the bowl, and then licking his lips, as if he couldn't wait. Schiller made Chinese food, rice, sweet and sour short ribs, hot and sour shredded potatoes, and a bowl of tomato and egg soup. The hungry and panicked Peter stared straight at the dining table, unable to say anything to refuse. Since he acquired the spider ability, Peter's appetite has also increased a lot, and he is very hungry. After eating a whole rice cooker, Peter was really embarrassed. He put down the bowl with red ears and said, "Really? I'm sorry, doctor, I seem to have eaten all your meals, I'll pay." "No, no need," Schiller said, "I was going to make another pot of rice. After all, I have to bring it back to my old friend. There are still some spare ribs in the pot. Go to that lunchbox in the cupboard and bring it back to Matt." The little spider ran to the kitchen and not only made a new pot of rice, but also cleaned the pots and bowls. Schiller thinks this version of Spider-Man is still very likable. In contrast, Pikachu had a round belly. After eating, he spread out on a chair and started snoring. Schiller grabbed his lightning-shaped tail and shook it, saying, "Even if someone is in charge of washing up today, the bowl is not a reason why you can avoid work and throw away the garbage." "Oh, sir, I can take it out along the way," said Peter. "Okay, please. Oh, by the way, there is no garbage disposal fee in Hell's Kitchen. Go ahead, there is a corner, there is a pile of waste, just throw the garbage there." Peter took 2 large bags of kitchen waste in his hand, turned out the back door of the clinic, and saw the place Schiller said at a glance. It was a little distance from the clinic, and there were a lot of broken bricks and waste wood. There was also some thrown by others, which was piled high and had a strong odor. There are several beggars next to these garbage heaps, all of them pointing to the kitchen waste left or not eaten by others to fill their stomachs. When little Spider walked past, these beggars were all on the other side of the waste heap. He didn't see them. Maybe he was full, or maybe the Chinese food made by Schiller was just too good for his taste, and the depression in Peter's heart was swept away. Empty, he happily carried 2 bags of garbage, a short sprint, plus a vigorous wave of his arm forward, he threw the garbage to the top of the waste heap. "Bingo!" yelled Peter, as he used to do when he and Uncle Ben went to take out the trash, far away, and then tossed the trash bags hard, hoping they would land right in the trash. But he didn't have that much strength before, and it was often Uncle Ben who cleaned up the mess for him. Peter thought, next time he goes to throw garbage, he must let his uncle see his current arm strength. He threw the garbage bags up, and one of the garbage bags shattered. There were bones left over from a few people's meals, some leftover minced meat from Schiller's cooking, a little shredded potato that wasn't finished, and half a sprout. The potatoes, but those beggars wanted to grab them as if they had seen some unparalleled delicacy. The waste heap has been piled up into a hill. The beggars have to step on broken bricks and wooden boards when they want to climb up. Moreover, the top of the waste heap is a triangle formed by several large broken walls. The beggars struggle to climb up. Climbing, then Peter saw someone picking up trash. He felt a little embarrassed, so he rushed to the middle of the mountainside of the waste heap, trying to climb to the top and take down the garbage. The beggars are not Spider-Man with mutation ability. They have been hungry for a long time and have no strength. One of the older old women was the closest to the top of the mountain, but when she was in a hurry, the piece of waste she was holding was broken by her. Down, losing the support of her hands, she fell straight back. As soon as Spider-Man stood at the top of the waste heap, he saw a beggar on the opposite side fall down. He reached out to grab it, but he was a step too late. There is everything in this waste pile. The wine bottle fragments, steel bars, and spiked wooden boards thrown from the upstairs by the drunkards. No matter which one hits, I am afraid they will lose half their lives. Fortunately, Peter had supernatural powers. He quickly bent down and grabbed the falling beggar. Before he could be proud, he heard a loud roar, followed by a sharp and harsh breaking sound, and a sound. The dull sound of objects being hit. Blood splashed. Peter turned his head and looked at the nearest intersection in disbelief. He was very familiar with the figure that flew out. That's Daredevil. A lot of blood flowed from the place where he landed, and the strong smell of blood made the world in front of Peter's eyes a hazy red. He rushed down like a madman, and Matt lay there. His eyes, nose and mouth were all losing blood, and his spine was twisted into a weird shape, as if it had been broken. But he wasn't dead, but after losing the nerves connected to his brain, he couldn't move at all. Peter was trembling all over. He couldn't care less. He quickly picked Matt up, and rushed him through the back door of Schiller's clinic. He shouted, "Doctor, doctor, there is someone here who needs treatment." When Schiller saw Matt, he knew that he might have been attacked by those who assassinated him again. He said, "The garage is next to him. Put him in the car and take him to the Presbyterian hospital immediately. With such a serious injury, I am afraid that only the best hospitals have some chance of being able to rescue it." Schiller's rampage on the streets of Manhattan still took Matt to the Presbyterian hospital as fast as he could. He still had some face in this hospital, and Matt was quickly sent to the emergency room. But soon, the attending doctor said to them with a serious face, "It is unlikely that this gentleman can be rescued, but unfortunately he no longer has the ability to write a suicide note or oral will. If you are his relatives, you may be able to go to the hospital. See him one last time." Peter was on the verge of collapsing, and all things were connected together here. He really didn't expect that what the gangsters wanted to murder that day was precisely the only good person in Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil Matt. He couldn't accept that all this was caused by him. If he killed those gangsters when he heard about it, no, or just told Matt about it, he would definitely be more careful. If he didn't stay at the clinic to eat, but left immediately after taking the medicine, Matt would not come out to find him. If he wasn't playful and hadn't thrown the 2 garbage bags so high, maybe he would have had time to throw Matt down the moment the car rushed out. He had so many chances to save his friends, but he still did nothing. Daredevil was dying, and Peter couldn't accept that fact. Schiller was very calm. He asked the doctor in charge, "Where is his main problem? Cardiopulmonary function, brain surgery, or intra-abdominal trauma?" The doctor shook his head and said, "None of them. There is a problem with his spine. I'm afraid his nerves will no longer be connected. Even if he can barely save his life, he will not be able to move for the rest of his life." Schiller took a deep breath and said, "I just want to know how to save him." The doctor hesitated and said, "Maybe Dr. Strange has a way." He is the best neurosurgeon in our place, and maybe he is the only one who can connect so many nerves. Schiller turned around immediately, and he said, Peter, I'm going to find someone who can save Matt, but you have to stay here, you know, www.mtlnovel.com. Matt was taken to the hospital, but those who want to kill him will not give up. After I leave, you must ensure that no one enters the operating room, and I will come back as quickly as possible. After speaking, he left immediately. Peter kept talking, trembling all over. No one will go in the operating room, no one will go in the operating room, I won't let anyone in. After Schiller left the hospital, he called Pepper directly and said, I hope to get the home address of a doctor named Strange. Pepper didn't ask him why. Soon, he received a string of addresses on his mobile phone. It was not far from the Presbyterian Hospital, and it was the most upscale apartment nearby. Schiller turned on the flash directly and arrived at the apartment building as quickly as possible. He didn't take the elevator at all, and he didn't intend to knock on the door. Several consecutive flashes that could pass through the wall appeared behind Strange, who was having afternoon tea. Strange heard a movement, and as soon as he turned his head, a crutch pressed straight against his Adam's apple. Listen, I don't have time to talk nonsense with you. A friend of mine was seriously injured and is now being rescued at the Presbyterian Hospital. You are the best neurosurgeon there. Now get your stuff and do the surgery right away. Strange showed an absurd expression. Schiller let go of his hand holding the crutch, but the crutch was still floating in midair, pointing straight at Strange. Strange raised his hands and stepped back. There was no one on the crutch. He took it, but kept it against his neck. As soon as Schiller reached out to the air, Strange's coat on the hanger flew over. Strange's eyes widened, watching this scene in disbelief. Schiller threw the coat to him and said, I think you understand that you have no right to refuse now, just follow me immediately. Strange swallowed and looked at Schiller's gray eyes. He really didn't have the courage to say no. After all, as long as he wasn't stupid, he could see that Schiller was not an ordinary person at all. Strange was dragged into the car, but he still said, I want to tell you first, I'm a doctor, not God. If your friend is dead, then no matter how much you threaten me, I can't help him resurrection. Schiller drove with an expressionless face. He said, we are all doctors. I know this better than you. I will come to you because I am sure you can save him. Strange breathed a sigh of relief, but still frowned and said stubbornly, you're just a psychologist. You'd better not jump to conclusions about neurosurgery. Before he could finish speaking, he saw a ballpoint pen on his forehead again. Schiller's hands were driving, and the ballpoint pen was floating so quietly. Strange made a mouth. The act of closing the zipper indicates that he will never speak again. On the other hand, the little spider was standing at the door of the operating room with a huge amount of guilt and self-blame, and he didn't even want to put a fly in it. But Matt's ex-girlfriend, Erica, also sneaked up to the door of the operating room. Erica didn't come to kill Matt. On the contrary, she knew the plan of the gang earlier than Peter. He always wanted to find an opportunity to tell Matt, but Matt left too hastily, just came over. Her feelings for Matt are very complicated. They are classmates and lovers, but they broke up because of some irreconcilable contradictions. Erica accepted Jin Bing's commission to assassinate Matt, but she was merciful everywhere. She wanted to really kill Matt, but she didn't watch it, and Matt was plotted by others. How could she not be anxious? Erica's family is rich, and it's not that she hasn't seen the world. She knows that Matt is seriously injured and the situation is very critical. Only the power of the beast can make Matt survive. Erica used the ninja escape technique and walked to the door of the operating room. The high school student in front of the door was not in her eyes at all. After a few days of observation, she knew that Peter was just a fighting skill. A high school student who doesn't know how. Erica plans to bypass him and go in directly. Coincidentally, Peter has the ability of spiders, the most important of which is spider sense. He was very nervous at this time, and the spider sense was several times more sensitive than before. As soon as Erica approached, Peter turned his head and died. Staring at the air in the corner of the wall, he felt someone was there, and he threw his fist at Erica. Erica knew that Peter's strength was different from ordinary people, so she didn't dare to take this move, but Peter's movements were full of loopholes. He hadn't undergone professional training. When he punched, the upper body leaned forward too much, and the lower body and legs were not separated. Without stabilizing her center of gravity, Erica's arm directly wrapped around Peter's wrist, and when she pulled him forward, Peter's center of gravity instantly became unstable and fell forward. Erica stumbled, and Peter was brought down by her. Perhaps it was the mental anxiety that inspired Peter to use his powers. He bounced up the moment he landed and grabbed Ellie with his arms. Card back waist. Erica herself was also very anxious, and both of them were very angry, but Erica was a female killer trained by the Hand Society. Swipe away. The short knife with the air blade slashed from Peter's shoulder to the bottom of his last rib, almost cutting off half of his body. In an instant, an overwhelming pain engulfed Peter, which almost unleashed his full potential. As soon as he exerted force, Erica was thrown out and fell to the other end of the corridor, and she couldn't get up for a long time. Peter also fell and sat down. He felt that he was dying of pain. Not only did the short knife cut through half of his back, but the air blade also cut into his lungs. Now he breathes, and the blood flows down, coming up with the trachea. It was the first time Peter felt such pain. The huge pain that the entire back muscle was torn, almost made him faint. He is only a high school student, and the biggest pain he has ever experienced in his life is only a few punches a few days ago. Compared with the current wound, it is a world of difference. His entire back was almost penetrated, and his lungs were also injured, making his breath smell of blood. Every inhalation was accompanied by huge pain, and Peter's tears flowed out physiologically and squeezed out of his throat. Painful moan. He suddenly realized that heroes can also be injured and bleed. And when the hero is injured, it will hurt to the death, it will not be good at all, and he will not be spared because of his special ability. His self-healing ability made him feel better in a few breaths. From the corner of his eye, he looked dimly into the operating room. Through the frosted glass, he could see Daredevil lying there. Daredevil tilted his head and opened his eyes. He was still awake, but he couldn't move. Peter knew that Daredevil had no self-healing ability, and he was dying. He is just a blind man who knows martial arts. Now that his entire spine is broken, he must be in great pain, even more so than him, but he can't make any sound. Peter felt terrified and hopeless, grief and anger for such a fragile life of a hero, and more importantly, a huge amount of guilt and remorse overwhelmed him. An ordinary man with no superpowers saved him from an underground boxing ring, but when he heard that the criminals were conspiring, he felt that it was none of his business and left, leaving his friend, a true hero, to suffer so much pain, even dying. Matt is the real hero and he is not. This intense emotion made his spider sense buzz, and in an instant, Peter's spider ability was amplified to the maximum. That intense emotion surged in his heart, and in his eyes, the whole world changed. With Erica instantly activated the escape technique and hid herself, but Peter's eyes were flushed, and he stared at her for a moment. The clumsy boy on the opposite side disappeared almost instantly. Then, a huge force slammed Erica against the wall. She spat out a mouthful of blood, used her last strength to use the escape technique to leave, and returned to the hospital. Schiller, and saw that under a wall that was on the verge of breaking, Peter was sitting, his eyes red. Strange entered the operating room. At this time, it was completely dark, and Schiller was standing opposite Spider-Man. Peter, I really didn't expect that our meeting would be under such circumstances, Schiller said. Peter's reaction is a little slow now. He doesn't understand what Schiller means. Schiller squatted down and looked into Peter's eyes. He said, I'm sorry, I didn't accompany you during the medical examination. As you can see, I'm not here anymore. The hospital is working. Peter's sanity recovered a little, and he said, it's you are the doctor. Apparently he remembered the doctor who had been chatting with him on the internet. Schiller said, yes, it's me. Peter lowered his head silently and said, I should have disappointed you. I'm not as good as I showed when chatting with you. I did a lot of wrong things and almost killed my friend. Schiller said, I think you've figured out something. Yes, Peter said in a hoarse voice, I understand the biggest truth is that injuries really hurt. It hurts so much, but he still has to do it. Peter whispered, he's a hero, and I'm not, maybe I'll never be a hero. Schiller's voice was still calm, and Peter couldn't hear a trace of blame in his tone. He just said calmly, perhaps you already understand that if there are capable people in this world, they won't save others, then no one will come to save you. Perhaps you think the current life is very bad, but even this kind of bad life is built for you by some people who are willing to pay. Even if they live like beggars, they can only have it after Daredevil cleans up the gangsters on that street. Peter, maybe I shouldn't say this, but now I'm afraid I'm the only one who can do it for me, Schiller said. With great power comes great responsibility. Spider-Man closed his eyes silently. In the early hours of the morning, in the darkest hour, Strange took off his gloves and walked out of the operating room, saying, "Congratulations, the operation was successful, and there is an 80% chance that his nerves will fully recover." After Peter heard this, he finally let out a loud roar, as if trying to vent all the emotions accumulated in his chest. He jumped directly from the window, and climbed quickly along the wall of the building to the roof, and then began to zip through the roofs of New York City. At this time, he saw the golden red mecha again, as if it was going to lead him somewhere. It kept spinning around him. Peter followed the mecha, and they jumped all the way to the New York TV tower. The two stood at the top of the New York TV tower. Peter tried desperately to roar, but he couldn't make a sound. All his emotions were smothered in his chest. He was going crazy. Stark's visor rose. Peter saw his face and said in surprise, "You are Stark." "Iron Man is Stark." "It's not surprising, boy, besides the owner of Stark Group, who else can develop such a mecha?" Stark said. "But the news said you were kidnapped and taken to Afghanistan." "Yes, but do you want to know how I got out?" Peter looked at him, and Stark said, "I built an energy core and installed it here." Stark pointed to his chest. "Now there is still an arc reactor here. In a cave in Afghanistan, I cut open my chest and stuffed a metal foreign object in it. My own blood soaked my pants." Peter just imagined that scene, and he felt a dull pain in his chest. He said, "It must be a bad taste, right?" "Of course, that hurts," Stark said, pretending to be relaxed, but Peter could hear the trembling in his tone, and he didn't seem willing to recall that day. "You have to cut the ribcage with a bone knife that isn't sharp, and then sew the wires into your flesh." Peter felt a chill on his back. He really didn't expect that Stark, who always appeared in the news as a playboy, this rich and carefree rich man who seemed to live a very prosperous and carefree life, also experienced such a painful past. He also shed a lot of blood. "I have experienced pain that is almost irresistible to ordinary people. Although I always like to call myself a genius, I am very awake, and I know that if I get hit by a bullet, I will bleed a lot. If shrapnel breaks my heart, I will die. If I lost a leg and I couldn't walk either. But I've done a lot of work, and there will be such a risky job. Am I looking for excitement?" Stark said. You reading www.uakanshu.com. "I am the richest person in the world, and I also have power that most people in this world don't have. I don't have any need to wear my expensive mecha and save those who can't afford me a month's salary. An ordinary person with a screw on his body, let alone taking such a big risk." Spider-Man closed his eyes, and after being silent for a while, he said, "With great power comes great responsibility, right?" Stark didn't answer. He just pointed to his heart. And Peter already understood what he meant, and he thought his heart had given him the answer. Facing the rising sun in New York City, Peter and Stark stood at the top of the TV tower, watching the golden light cut through the clouds, coating all buildings in New York with brilliant gold. From today, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, he understands a truth. A so-called hero is also immortal. They can hurt, bleed, lonely and lost. The only difference between them and ordinary people on Earth is that they have a sense of responsibility that ordinary people do not have, and a great determination to carry out justice until death. No one in this world can resist such severe pain. When they walk in the dark, they condense the bone and blood engraved with pain into a strong armor on the body, and after the dawn, they use this hard bone to save the world. Spider-Man stood up from the iron frame of the TV tower for the first time. He hadn't put on Spider-Man's tights, not so tall and strong, but his soul stood up, became tall and straight, those turbulent chests. Emotion turned into a force, spreading from his wound to his body. Facing the first ray of the morning sun, he thought, it was dawn. It's time to save the world. Although Matt was rescued, he is still not out of danger and is still under observation in the intensive care unit. Schiller said to Strange, "Dr. Strange, I owe you a favor. If you need any help in the future, you can come to me." Strange's face was not very good. After all, he was caught in the afternoon and underwent nearly 10 consecutive operations. He said impatiently, God bless me, don't see you again, weirdo. Schiller said, I believe you have seen my abilities before, so let me give you another piece of advice, be careful when driving. Strange said, don't play these weird tricks with me, I'm going back to sleep. After he finished speaking, he left, and Schiller shrugged. He knew that Dr. Strange's fate would definitely not be changed. With Strange's current state, he couldn't hear anything. But it doesn't matter. When he asks his grandfather to tell his grandma, and wants to treat his arm injury, he will naturally think of Schiller. After returning to the clinic for a good night's sleep, Schiller woke up and found that he had received 2 more random chat opportunities, indicating that he had a major influence on 2 important characters in the plot. One should be Daredevil, Matt, while the other is Spider-Man. Schiller intends to use it once. Now it seems that his ability is in urgent need of strengthening. After seeing the accident of Daredevil Matt, he feels that his defense and evasion ability is still not strong enough, especially his reaction speed, even if he can in the blink of an eye, in just a few tenths of a second. No one dared to say that they would definitely be able to react, and it was not enough to expect the spider sense that was ineffective at that time. So Schiller turned on the chat system and used a random chat. Soon, his chat partner came, but the strange thing was that the avatar this time was a little weird. The frame of the avatar was dark, and it seemed that only 2 eyes were shining. As soon as the communication was connected, Schiller heard a string of languages he could not understand coming from the opposite side. All of his chatting partners spoke English before. Even if Gui communicated directly with him using brain waves, the meaning was easy to understand. But this time he met this chat partner, and Schiller didn't understand a word of the chatter there. He knocked on the system and said, can't the chat system be able to translate it? What language is the other side speaking? Because of Schiller's experience in his previous life, he has been to various universities to visit, tour and communicate. In addition to English and Chinese, he can speak some European languages more or less, but the other party's language seems to be completely different from these languages. Either, Schiller had never heard the language. The system gave a one-line reply. The chat system will automatically translate any language of the chat object. If there is still incomprehensible content, it means that the host and the other party have differences in life form, or to understand the other party's language, special brain organs are required. Quote, Schiller now understands that the other party is definitely not a human being. The long series of unknown voices he made may require a designated brain organ to receive them. It is not a language, but more like a signal. Schiller is a human being and may not have them. This kind of brain organ of the ethnic group, so naturally he can't understand what he is talking about. Schiller opened his head and looked at it, and sure enough, there were a few words clearly written on it, Nar of symbiosis. He didn't expect that this random connection could even reach Nar. The god of symbiote has been introduced in great detail in the comics related to the Venom series. In short, he is an ancient creature that has existed since the beginning of the universe, the Lord of the Abyss. He created a weapon called the Black Death Sword, cut off the head of a celestial group, and then began to plague other civilizations in the universe. He developed a method of creating dark creatures, that is, splitting the symbiote, and he took his army of symbiotes and the dragon army he created to run wild in the universe. Until one day, he instructed the symbiote army to attack the Earth, and then he was struck by a thunderbolt by the old man Thor, and he was disconnected from most of the symbiotes he created. Most of the symbiotes are scattered all over the universe, possessing all kinds of life. Many of them are kind and rational aliens, which makes the symbiotes realize that their creator's behavior of destroying civilization is evil, so they rebelled collectively. After the betrayal, the symbiotes imprisoned their creator of symbiotes, Nar, on a remote and desolate planet, the so-called symbiote mother planet. Schiller wasn't in a hurry to use the next chat opportunity. Instead, he began to study what Nar was talking about with great interest. Since the beginning of the connection, Nar has been talking at length, and the syllables that are completely incomprehensible are sent quickly. The setting here is more reasonable. It is not like in the comics that the entire universe speaks English. Schiller can't understand a word of what symbiotes said, but symbiotes has been talking about it at length. Schiller really figured out some rules. After Schiller's repeated confirmation, he finally knew what symbiotes meant. He was cursing. That's right, although not everyone in the universe speaks English, when all the creatures in the universe swear at people, their tone is basically the same, and some swear words appear frequently. That's how symbiosis is. Schiller, hearing a syllable, Nataru, repeatedly appeared in the angry tone of symbiotes. He guessed that this should be the same swear words in the language of the symbiote race as the words beginning with F. So when symbiotes finished swearing for a long time, he said lightly, Nataru. There was a strange silence on the opposite side. The symbiosis has scolded the street for so many years, and this is the first time he has been scolded back by the street. Schiller's guess was very accurate. That word was indeed in the language of the symbiotes. The symbiotes attacked Schiller with a string of more angry words, but Schiller remained the same, and just replied lightly, Nataru. After listening a lot, Schiller also learned several other swear words, and even learned the exact same tongue flick and pronunciation. The symbiotes kept sending long speeches, and Schiller often picked a few of these words and scolded them back. Anyway, the symbiosis can't come and beat him along the network cable. What about the Master of the Abyss? What about Killing Group? While scolding the symbiotes, he recalled the origin story of this ancient creature. The symbiotes is also quite unlucky, whether it is good or bad. The scum he fell from himself, he locked himself up after his betrayal, and imprisoned their creator alone on a planet, and according to the present look, it must have been a long time in captivity. In fact, it is not difficult to understand that he scolded the street. If Schiller was put aside, Schiller would also scold him. Then Schiller began to study the ability to replicate the symbiotes, but he was a little hesitant. He estimated that the ability of the symbiotes was to create symbiotes, but Schiller didn't want this ability. He opened his avatar and found that the 4 words for copying ability turned red, and a bracket appeared next to it, which read, "The opponent's ability is mutating, please copy carefully." It was the first time that Schiller discovered this phenomenon. This also begins with the origin story of the symbiotes. After being imprisoned, the god of symbiote didn't give it for free. Of course, he would try to escape. It was better for Schiller to come early than coincidence. Not long after the god of symbiote came up with this method, Schiller connected with him. The symbiotes is a very ancient creature. Although it is not certain whether it is the first creature in the 7th universe, it must be the first few. His strength is more from his talent. His brain is not very useful. He can think of a way to escape, not by wisdom, but also by using his special nature. He didn't see much, but he knew that the god of symbiote, the ability of the offspring created by him is not the same, some are strong, some are weak. There are also some symbiote descendants with special abilities, and the symbiotes intends to use this feature. He plans to create a special symbiote. He wants the descendants of his split this time to have no entity, but become one. A conscious smoke. When he transfers his consciousness into the body of this offspring, he can get rid of the shackles of the planet's cage. Seriously, this is not a very clever way, and it may not be possible to get out of there, but the symbiosis is imprisoned on a lonely planet. What else can he do if he doesn't find something for himself to kill time? So there are only 2 daily routines for him, scolding the streets and pranking. Just when he made this new offspring and was about to transfer his consciousness, Sheila connected with him, so the ability of the symbiotes was in the process of mutation, because he was transferring his own consciousness into the new body. Consciousness and ability is becoming the ability of the new body. Generally speaking, if it is a connection object like the symbiotes, it will be like a little spider that has not been bitten. Schiller is almost unable to copy his ability. The symbiotes used to fight in the universe, relying on the powerful living abyss Black Death sword. Later, his ability to split dark creatures also came from his original nature. After his defeat and fall, he suddenly had the ability without any source. These things can't be copied by Schiller, and even if he could, he wouldn't copy this ability. Why would he cut himself into pieces? And if it doesn't work, the scum he separates will join forces to betray him, which is really unreliable. So without hesitation, Schiller chose to copy the ability that was mutating. If this ability is invisible or avoid damage, then Schiller can make a lot of money. Even if it is like venom, it can have a relatively powerful power, or turn it into something like a battle suit, which is also good. The symbiote Gray Fog special ability has been loaded. In an instant, Schiller felt that he suddenly had another vision. He still used his eyes, but he was not using the eyes. The signals received from the eyes were still transmitted to his brain, www.mtlnovel.com, he seems to have copied a symbiote directly. No, it seems to be a little different. The ability of the system to copy will not bring any foreign objects to Schiller, nor can it copy the opposite equipment or other objects. For example, if Schiller replicates Iron Man's abilities, then he might be able to get Stark's genius brain, or his ability to develop equipment, but he can't get a finished mech like the Mark V. What the system can copy is only the ability of the chat object itself, not the things outside his body. Schiller felt that there seemed to be an ignorant soul that was stuffed into his body. But it was not a foreign object, and it was still himself. The symbiote did not become something that could leave the host at any time like Venom, but became a part of Schiller. Simply put, it becomes the ability that the system loads into Schiller, and it becomes a part of Schiller. Like other abilities that Schiller obtains from the system, it cannot be separated from Schiller. If Schiller dies, it will also die, and cannot escape, let alone have a second host. But it also has some properties of a symbiote. For example, it can think, and Schiller can feel that an area of his brain seems to have been changed. The symbiote has become an organ of his brain, and the communication between them, more like a dialogue between one personality and another. This symbiote is indeed very special, and Schiller will understand in the future that the symbiote also added more ambition when he created it. After being copied by the system made further changes to the symbiote in order to integrate the characteristics of the symbiote with the characteristics of the system's loading capacity, which caused it to become a life that may be unique in the entire universe. Form is also an extremely powerful form of life. The learning speed of the symbiote is astonishingly fast. Schiller has just copied this ability, and after just one afternoon, another voice in his mind can communicate with him with clear brainwaves, although he can only briefly express some emotions, but this is already very important. After being able to communicate with this symbiote, Schiller planned to start testing his abilities. He thought that this symbiote was similar to Venom. As long as he shouted, "Mask!" as in the movie, there would be a mass something sticky came out to wrap him, and then there were two big white eyes, a mouth of fangs and a long tongue. The symbiote could directly feel the image Schiller imagined. He sent a series of brain waves of denial, and kept repeating a sentence in Schiller's mind. "I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky." It seems to be because he felt that Schiller didn't seem to like the sticky feeling of the symbiote. To be honest, Schiller just doesn't want to hurt this newborn little guy. After all, he will be his right-hand man in the future. It's not that Schiller doesn't like the sticky texture of the symbiote, but he can't stand it. No matter how powerful the symbiote is, the texture like a pile of mud is really creepy. It seems that he is eager to prove that he is not sticky. The gray fog, who has just learned to communicate, controls his body and stands up before Schiller has reacted. Then, in an instant, Schiller found the world in his eyes changed. He lost his eyes, or he lost his entire stylized body, and he added thousands of sensors. Schiller found that he could suddenly clearly feel every detail of everything in the clinic's bedroom. These signals were constantly being transmitted to his brain, but it was not what he saw, but what he felt. His eyesight is far from good, and he can see the details of the unevenness of every fiber in the quilt, but he can feel it now. At the beginning, each sensor sent a lot of information, which made his brain completely unable to react. Come on, but soon, this information was quickly processed by his other thinking organ, the symbiote, and fed back to Schiller's brain again. With so many details, Schiller felt a sense of control over everything. Immediately afterwards, Schiller found that he seemed to be able to control this state, so he began to schedule the work of all the sensors to spread them out as much as possible. Until these sensors were spread on the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the bedroom, Schiller saw that he had turned into a gray fog. That's right, he lost his entire body and turned into an erratic fog. Every factor in the fog became his sensor. Thousands of symbiotic factors were quickly woven into a huge information collection network, not letting go of any detail. As long as the factor could enter, it would be very helpful to Schiller. In other words, there are no secrets. For example, Schiller can even see the arrangement of iron elements in the electric kettle. If he pays attention, he can also feel the distribution of oxygen in the air and the existence of other rare gases, which have reached the molecular level. Even like the microscopic observation ability of atoms close together makes the world more grand and wonderful than what Schiller can observe as a human being. Thank goodness, you're not that kind of muddy symbiote, Schiller thought. Gray Mist seemed to feel that he was being praised, and a very happy mood came from him. It seemed that in order to further demonstrate his strength, he directly controlled Schiller, and the mist that turned into dissipated. The gray fog began to no longer gather together, but spread out evenly like ordinary fog. Soon, a hazy fog shrouded Hell's Kitchen. A large number of factors have become more alienated, but they have always sent various information to Schiller's brain. After the scope is expanded, this information has increased by hundreds or thousands, but there are symbiotes to help him deal with it. Le could simply focus on a certain part, like he could even feel 5 or 6 blocks away, in the heart of Hell's Kitchen, where the gang was on fire. He could even feel the traces of every bullet in the exchange of fire. He concentrated, trying to find a bald man with a target pattern on his forehead. The gray fog locked him on in an instant, and even transmitted all the microscopic element information in his environment back to Schiller's brain. This ability is really too powerful. Where there is fog, no one can escape Schiller's eyes. Schiller felt that if it was his own brain to process so much complicated information, he would probably go crazy on the spot, but this symbiote seems to be born with such an ability. In a heavy fog, the information transmitted by each factor can be classified, filtered and concentrated by him at an extremely fast speed. In a very short process, Schiller only needs to focus on what he wants to know. He will naturally know. He seems to be a person who is playing SimCity from the perspective of God. He can observe all the movements in the fog at any time, and no detail can escape the penetration of the gray fog factor. In addition, this magical factor can penetrate into the interior of the object to destroy it, such as destroying the stable molecular structure and turning the object into powder in an instant. But the gray fog told him that this ability is only for things that have a stable molecular structure, and there can be no interference from any other force, otherwise it will also be unable to exert influence. But this is really a powerful enough ability. When returning to human form, Schiller can choose to gather his body in any foggy place, that is to say, within the range that the gray fog can cover. He can disappear in a certain place infinitely and then in another place. A place suddenly appeared. But this can't completely replace the flash, because it takes a certain amount of time to transform into the gray fog. The gray fog disperses, condenses, and then transforms into a human form, which is not as fast as the flash. Things on Marvel's side have come to an end for the time being. Daredevil Matt is recovering, but the little spider wants to follow Stark to learn how to be a superhero, but unfortunately he has a final exam recently, and he must hurry up to get rid of the Fallen. The course was made up, and there was no time to go out to wander. Stark was annoyed by Nick Fury's bald head. Recently, he has been hiding in the laboratory all day tinkering with mechas, and he doesn't go out much, so Schiller fell asleep. Go back to the 600th world. Not long after returning to DC, Schiller discovered a headache for the symbiote in his body. Schiller, who returned to the 600th world, was sorting out his equipment. Among them, because of Jonathan's arrest, there was not much left of the fear gas. Fortunately, he had almost swept away Jonathan's inventory before, and he was left with fear. Poison gas is a good product that has been concentrated. He was diluting the remaining fear gas, ready to put it in a watering can for his convenience. The fear gas didn't work for Schiller at all, so he didn't have to cover himself tightly during the experiment like Jonathan did. In his apartment, the only two living creatures, Schiller and Pikachu, were both not afraid of this fear poisonous gas. Schiller does not care to leak it out during the test. In addition, he has no background in chemistry education. When doing dilution, there are about 200 laboratory regulations that can be violated in 1 minute. It is light without gloves and gas masks, so every time he finishes it. After that, the house is basically filled with a low concentration of fear gas. It was the same this time. After a series of extremely non-standard chemical dilution operations, Schiller reluctantly distributed the fear gas into different watering cans, but at this time, a series of excited signals suddenly came from his brain. This is delicious, 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 eat for me, eat, eat. Schiller was stunned. Is this symbiote saying that fear gas is delicious? He suddenly thought of the setting of symbiotes in the comics, especially the setting of Venom. The reason why Venom can eat chocolate instead of human brains is because they all contain something called phenylethylamine. This is a chemical that excites the human brain, and it is contained in both the human brain and chocolate. Is there also fear in the poisonous gas? Schiller thinks about it. This is indeed very likely. Fear of poison gas will induce the deepest fear in people's brains, and it will also make people's negative emotions suddenly active. It is difficult to say whether Jonathan used this poison gas when he was making it, a chemical substance. Now it seems that not only has he used it, but he seems to have used it a lot. How do you want to eat? Schiller asked in his mind. You reading www.uakanshu.com. The symbiote didn't seem to understand either. He only knew that this kind of thing in front of him was very attractive to him. Schiller had no choice but to take out a diluted bottle of fear gas and spray it into his nose. He instantly felt that the symbiote in his mind was excited, and kept shouting in his mind, "It's delicious, 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 not enough, not enough, not enough, but also more." Well, Schiller thought, the symbiote's appetite should be quite large. He simply took out a small bottle of undiluted, liquid fear gas, poured it directly into his mouth and drank it. This thing doesn't have any taste, but for a moment, he can feel the symbiote in his body, and he seems to be a little confused with excitement. He babbled and sent a long series of brainwaves that Schiller couldn't understand at all, and then used all the vocabulary he had just learned to shout in Schiller's mind. Finally, after a while, Schiller's Zhou Shen began to fill with a kind of fog, which was deeper than the ordinary gray fog, and became a little black. Well, Schiller thought, it seems that the high concentration of fear gas is a bit like strong alcohol to the symbiote, and the gray fog is directly drunk. Moreover, after the symbiote got drunk, it reacted a bit like a human being. First, it was drunk, said a lot of nonsense, and then vomited. The fog around Schiller's body should have been spit out after the gray fog was drunk. The gray fog recovered quickly, but after he recovered, he still wanted to ask Schiller for a drink, but Schiller sternly refused. But he obviously didn't give up, humming in Schiller's mind, very aggrieved. Schiller was very helpless. How could his symbiote become a wine mummy? For this class assignment, I would like to commend Mr. Robert. His argument for emotional splitting analysis is very consistent with the theory I talked about in the class. Of course, Miss Hoff wrote the most words this time, but I have to say, the number of words does not represent the quality of the completion. If you can explain your argument clearly within 3,000 words, I will be happier. There is nothing unexpected. This time there is still one person who has not handed in the homework. Mr. Wayne, please come to my office after class. If you don't plan to finish the homework, then I don't think you will use it to take the final exam. After all, if you don't have any homework credits, even if you take the exam, you will definitely not get the credits for the semester. Schiller closed the textbook in front of him and said, "Get out of class is over." Gotham University is located on the east coast of the United States. We all know that almost all the famous universities in the United States are located on the East Coast, including Harvard, MIT, Princeton and so on. Gotham University is not a competitor of these schools. Although it is a national university recognized by the state, it is not an Ivy League school. Moreover, the law and order of Gotham City is notoriously bad. There are hardly many local students in the United States will apply for this university. Even if Gotham is a local person who can read a university, it can also apply to a good university nearby. This has led to students who stayed at Gotham University either not being able to apply for the outside world, or they were international students abroad. You can hardly expect these people to have good grades. Most of them can finish their homework on time, all because of Schiller's famous name. But this is actually not the biggest reason for the low ranking of Gotham University. After all, Gotham University has such an extremely strong backup support as the Wayne family. Even if it is to spend money, it can invite many top professors. There are many professors and top laboratory equipment, so you won't have to worry about attracting high-end talents. If you have to talk about security issues, in fact, as long as you don't leave Gotham University, it's still very safe here. The problem is that the president of Gotham University has always been reluctant for the Wayne family to control the school too much, but don't think he is so aloof. Gotham University is his bargaining chip to move up in the political arena, and he is not willing to give it up. This fruit was given to the Wayne family. Therefore, Gotham University has been in a half-dead state, and Schiller is very dissatisfied with this. He does not want to have a teaching experience in a bottom-ranked school on his perfect resume. So despite all the chaos in Gotham, Schiller just wanted to farm at Gotham University. He set himself a small goal, that is, to make Gotham University a member of the Ivy League first. Everyone is from Northeastern University. Gotham University's football team is also good. Joining the Ivy League is not too much, right? Before that, Batman and other criminals just beat their brains out, and he didn't want to care. In the afternoon, when Bruce came to Schiller's office, he explained, "Professor, it's not that I haven't written my thesis. I'll ask my housekeeper to bring the USB drive over later. If you don't bring it, you don't write it," Schiller said viciously. He knocked on the table and said, "If I can't do anything about Bruce not doing homework, then other people won't be affected, you think so, right? After all, it's normal for the Wayne family to have some privileges. But the hundreds of millions of dollars you funded the school didn't fall into my pocket, so if you don't do your homework again, I'll deduct all your credits and you won't be able to get your diploma." Bruce said in a low voice, "Actually, I have obtained my diploma now, and the factory that prints the diploma is also my family's." Schiller touched his forehead and said, "What nonsense am I talking to you, rich second generation? How is your investigation?" Miss Christine did not leave Gotham University. She disappeared in the school, but this has nothing to do with Jonathan, because he disappeared after Jonathan was arrested. "Do you have any doubts?" Schiller asked. In fact, the president of Gotham University is very suspicious. Before Schiller could open his mouth to question, Bruce said, "I really don't have any evidence to prove that he kidnapped Christine, but the 3 jury members who actively exonerated Jonathan, and Jonathan's defense attorney, are from a well-known gang in East Gotham, the Red Ravens. And the president of Gotham University is friends with the mob boss. They went to the mayor's dinner together, and most importantly, his daughter married the head of the smuggling logistics of the Red Crows." But what kind of role does Christine play in this story? As far as I know, she's just an ordinary girl, just very beautiful. I suspect that Miss Christine may have heard some of the principal's conspiracy about Jonathan. Bruce put his arms on the table. He frowned and said, "You know, the football league is about to start, and the cheerleader has a lot to deal with, and their new season's dance clothes have not been approved before. Christine was very anxious about this. She chose to go to the principal. Maybe she heard something at that time that she shouldn't have heard." "Do you have any evidence?" Schiller asked. "I think I'm no longer obsessed with the evidence, and of course I won't go to the principal so arbitrarily, because it may be a surprise." Schiller said, "I suspect that Miss Christine is not dead. You know, if the person who did it is the principal, then it is unlikely that he will kill Christine directly, because the cheerleader has no way to changing a head in such a short period of time, and if there is a problem with the cheerleading troupe, it will definitely affect the results of the football game. This is the only thing Gotham University can take, and it is part of the president's personal resume." Bruce sighed and said, "Anyway, Miss Christine is innocent. Have you seen Gordon lately? How's he going?" "It didn't go well. I think if I can find Miss Christine as a witness to accuse this group of deliberately exonerating, then maybe Jonathan can go to jail." "Actually, have you ever thought about it? If Jonathan goes to prison, it doesn't have to be Gotham Prison." "You want me to build a private prison?" Schiller didn't speak. He just stood up and said, "Do you plan to go through a process like this for every criminal you catch in the future? Or, do you think it's very interesting to go around with them in these unfair judicial proceedings? With this time, not only the Mawson neighborhood, but the blackness of the 2 or 3 neighborhoods around it can help you settle it down. What exactly is what Batman should do? You know better than me, Bruce." Bruce laughed again with a full heart. Schiller still has a problem to solve. That is, if Jonathan goes to a prison, no matter which prison he is in, the source of the fear gas will be unstable, and these will be used up sooner or later. He doesn't have a formula himself, and he doesn't know how to deploy it. It would be a pity that such a useful weapon would disappear. Schiller is more cunning than Batman, who is rampaging now. He knows that the best way now is not to go to Jonathan to ask for the recipe for fear gas, let alone get him out of the prison and control him to work for himself. That's troublesome and dangerous. What he has to do is to find a next home for Jonathan, let those people ask for the formula, control Jonathan's work, and then Schiller continues to enjoy the ready-made fear gas of stealing. Those people won't use the fear gas to do good things, so as long as they don't get it, it's fine. The question is to buy everything for 0 yuan. You give birth to me and steal from here. How much money is produced and how much is stolen? With the sharp weapon of gray fog, can you still catch me? Jonathan is still too young now. Schiller estimates that he has already handed over the formula for the fear gas. After the group of people got the formula, there are ways to make it. Schiller knew that since these people wanted to do big things, the amount of fear gas would not be as small as Jonathan's, and to produce this gas on a large scale, a factory assembly line would definitely be needed. There are many chemical plants in Gotham, but most of them are not very professional. There is only one place for high-end chemical preparation production lines, and that is the Wayne Chemical Plant. No matter how this group of people try to cover up and operate, if they want to achieve their goals, they absolutely cannot bypass the production line of the Wayne Chemical Plant. With the gray fog ability, Schiller can walk farther at night. Reading www.uikanshu.com. As he expected, it was another rainy night. Outside the railing of the Wayne Chemical Plant, Schiller saw a car with a license plate ending in 676 driving into the chemical plant. In the next few days, trucks continued to shuttle between the Wayne chemical plants, seemingly transporting some large equipment. Schiller did not intend to stop them, but tracked the trucks and found the destination of their smuggling chemical plant production lines. Of course, it is in the east of Gotham City, where the Red Crows are located. There is also a chemical factory there, but it is not as large as the Wayne Chemical Factory. The production line equipment stolen from the Wayne Chemical Factory is always shipped to this small chemical factory. However, it didn't work as expected. There were problems as soon as the production line started. First, they lacked a few machines. After all, the production line of the Wayne Chemical Plant was not prepared for the production of fear gas, and some machines still needed to be purchased. Second, the chemists they recruited did not seem to be as powerful as Jonathan. The experiments before going to the assembly line did not go well. The effect of the copied fear gas was not as strong as Jonathan's, and it was not as good as his concentrate. So all the problems came back. They wanted to get Jonathan out. Although Jonathan, the scarecrow criminal, was just a fledgling, his professional level was very strong. The Red Crow gang couldn't relieve the grind and kill the donkey. They still had to find a way to help he is exonerated. Schiller didn't expect these gangsters to be so stupid. He had already obtained the formula, but still couldn't produce it. He had already planned to block the opening of the production line and swallow as much as he produced. Schiller's $0 purchase plan failed, but he didn't intend to give up. Since the Red Raven gang couldn't do it, he had to find a better next for Jonathan, such as Sal Maroni. Maroni's gangster family is also located in the east side of Gotham, where gangsters are much more rampant than the west side near Gotham University. To put it simply, because it is the least economically developed area of Gotham, the slums in the west side are simply a paradise with simple folk customs. The gangs there are very involved. Like the Schwigo gang, a small gang with only 100 members, it is almost impossible to control a nightclub. The Maroni gangster family owns a restaurant, 2 bars, a cabaret and a strip club, making it almost the largest gang there. The Maroni family and the Red Crows have a long history of grievances. At the junction of their territory, there is a bar where fire often breaks out. Both parties want to control this important traffic hub, but in the end, neither of them succeeded. That bar has become a no-holds-barred zone in the entire Eastern District, and it is also the place where all kinds of news circulate the fastest. Thrall can stand in Gotham, especially in the most dangerous and chaotic Eastern District. He is somewhat capable. The Red Crow gang's stealing of the production line could not be concealed from his eyes. In the basement of a bar controlled by the Maroni family, which is the closest to the 3 Dodge zone, Maroni lit a cigar and said to his subordinates, "I am from R. The old friend." The police chief Victor learned that the red-headed boy opposite seemed to want to make some noise. His subordinates said, "Yes, they seem to have stolen a lot of big machines from the south or the southwest. I know from a kid who lost a bet that their boss seems to want to produce some kind of chemical. I heard that it can be controlled." Other people. Sal narrowed his eyes and said, Victor and I had dinner a few days ago, and he chatted about a case. The murderer was a doctor of chemistry, and he seemed to be a very powerful professor at Gotham University. Matter. His subordinate said, I was with the red-headed mistress, and there were 2 bodyguard informants. He had a hot fight with that mistress recently, and I would take something out of her mouth. Thrall turned the lighter in his hand and said, they eat 1 more piece of meat, and we have to eat 1 less. But now it seems that they not only want to divide the meat, but also want to swallow us in 1 bite, so let's see who is more powerful. Maroni's guess was very accurate. He didn't have much effort to get all the action plans of the Red Crow gang. Although the head of the Red Crow gang was very smart, he was still relatively young, and Maroni got the pulse. At the same time, Schiller also contributed greatly. He did one of the most crucial things, that is, he got the recipe for fear gas from the Red Crow gang, and inadvertently let Maroni's informant find it. Maroni was able to get on the line of the police chief, indicating that he was much more sophisticated than the head of the Red Crow gang, and his connections were wider than him. Soon, he found a reliable chemist to analyze this for him. The conclusion is that this is a large-scale biochemical weapon with extremely strong efficacy. After reaching this conclusion, Maroni certainly couldn't let the actions of the Red Crows succeed. Otherwise, once they got this important weapon, the Maroni family would be out of business. And the first step is to resolutely not allow the Red Crow gang to release Jonathan on bail through the police informant. On another dark night, Gordon went off work as usual. His immediate boss, Rantelos, didn't like him, and he didn't give him any useful work. He is now almost a secretary of the police station, and even field patrols. It's not up to him. Therefore, he left work early, and his boss walked a little ahead of him, because he was going to a wine party. As soon as Gordon went out, he saw his boss walking around a corner, and then a fast car hit him, and his boss was knocked out of the police station gate for more than 10 meters. Gordon didn't care much. He rushed back to the police station to call for someone, but before the ambulance came, Rantelos was out of breath. Originally, he was a very cautious old policeman, but recently, the Red Crow gang gave him too many benefits because he was eager to bail Jonathan, which made his greed get out of hand. He even wanted to marry the sister of the Red Crow gang leader, so he was too anxious. He didn't even realize that he was being targeted by the opponent of the Red Crow gang. It all happened so fast that before Gordon could react, he was pushed into the position of his boss. Of course, this is also a good thing Maroni has done. If you want to hinder the opponent, of course, you have to pick the one they don't like the most. The contradiction between Gordon and Rantelos is too obvious. In the entire police station, almost all police officers have some heard that Maroni naturally chose Gordon. Of course, hindering his opponent is only the first step. Of course, Maroni also wants to produce this important weapon. He was more daring than the Red Crows. He directly bribed the manager of the Wayne chemical plant and used a production line that produced nitric acid to secretly produce this poisonous gas. He didn't even want to move it, and planned to produce it in the Wayne chemical plant in a way that concealed it. But there is still the same problem. To produce fear gas on a large scale, you need some larger scale separators and other high-end equipment. Although Maroni is richer than the Red Crow gang, he is still not sure whether it should be done. Big investment. So he still found the chemist and asked him to manually copy a little of the fear gas. The person he was looking for was much more powerful than the Red Crow gang. Although he couldn't restore 100% of the fear gas, he could almost restore 80%, although he still couldn't. Concentrated, but the effect is also very good. Seeing that it was so effective, Maroni had the idea of investing a lot of money. After all, just spraying someone with a watering can make them go crazy. Who else would be his opponent in the entire Eastern District? Once the entire Eastern District is won, the income of tens of millions of dollars is just a cloud. So, Maroni hurriedly purchased a batch of needed equipment from other states, which cost him millions of dollars and a lot of favors, and hired a group of chemists to work for him with high salaries. Naturally, such a large-scale production could not be carried out at the Wayne chemical plant. There was no chemical plant on Maroni's site, so he launched a fire and killed more than 30 good players from the Red Crow gang. The small chemical factory was snatched from the site. At this time, Bruce finally found out that his chemical factory had been stolen. He finally realized that the gangsters had already started producing this poisonous gas. At the same time, Gordon received a tip from an anonymous person who claimed that he saw a car with a license plate number ending in 676 that often circled around the Wayne chemical plant. Gordon and Bruce hit it off, and the combination of Batman and detective came out again. They quickly found the car and caught the tail of the Red Crow gang. Overnight, the Red Crow gang was taken over by Batman. Although they were much stronger than the Gully Gang, with hundreds of members, there were no serious criminals among them. They were just ordinary gang members. Batman fighting in the front, Gordon caught in the back, and overnight the entire gang was arrested, more than 200 people. The leader of the Red Crow gang was almost dying of anger. Although they stole the production line of the Wayne chemical factory, they didn't even produce any fear gas, and the production line and the chemical factory were taken away by the Maroney gang. When the angry leader of the Red Crows was arrested, he testified against Sal Maroney, and Batman took aim at the Maroney gang again. However, Maroney is much more cunning and cautious than the leader of the Red Crow gang. The entire chemical plant is heavily guarded, and all members are in a state of high tension. Batman did not find a good opportunity for a while. Knowing that he was being targeted, Maroney began to seek the help of his own umbrella, the police chief Victor. Victor first withdrew the case of the theft of the Wayne chemical plant internally, intending to smooth it out, and then, under the order of Maroney, continued to interfere in Jonathan's trial, trying to exonerate Jonathan so that he could go to the horse. Ronnie's chemical plant worked for him. And Schiller, he added another fire to the tension of this multifaceted confrontation. Schiller guided Police Chief Victor, and from the evidence room, he got a bottle of fear gas concentrate developed by Jonathan. After Maroney got this concentrate, he became more aware of the importance of Jonathan, so he kept putting pressure on Victor, asking him to bail Jonathan out as soon as possible. www.mtlnovel.com. Before Victor could make a move, one person found him. Unsurprisingly, Batman was the president of Gotham University. Although Victor is the police chief, he is not closely related to Gotham politics. Instead, he is the president of Gotham University and knows many jury members and state legislators. He was bought by the Red Crow gang before, and he has a close relationship with the Red Crow gang. This is something everyone knows. As a result, the Red Crow gang has fallen, and the president of Gotham University urgently needs another umbrella. Without the protection of the big gangsters in Gotham, you can hardly move an inch. Naturally, the president of Gotham University didn't mind switching to the Maroney gang. Knowing that they were also planning to use fear gas, the president told Victor. That girl wasn't careful enough. She was bragging about being Bruce Wayne's date. I kidnapped her while she came to me, and if I could influence the Wayne family heir, use his power, excuse Jonathan, of course, without difficulty. With a woman, Victor asked, but little Wayne is not stupid. Although he is nostalgic for flowers and fools around every day, how can he be willing to do things for us just because he is a date? We don't need him willingly, said the principal. You want to kidnap little Wayne? No, it's too risky. Victor said, we may not be able to control him. The entire Wayne family accounts for more than half of Gotham City's economy. If Bruce's idea fails, the retaliation they will face will be terrible. The principal said, actually, I have already figured out a way. We kidnap little Wayne, but we don't have to control him, we can also replace him. Chapter 31. Victor and the president of Gotham University are thinking about how to deal with Bruce, but Batman is also thinking about how to deal with them. After these days of tempering, Batman has figured out a lot of things, such as every question Schiller asked him, he has found the answer. Now he has admitted that he is different from the police. He is not the embodiment of absolute justice. In fact, he is no different from those criminals, because they do not obey the law. Batman has a firm determination, that is, to only claim what belongs to himself, justice, regardless of judicial justice. So his method of investigating Christine's disappearance is no longer so awkward and reckless. Once Batman has figured it out, no one can match his ingenuity and execution. He first started with the president of Gotham University. Compared with Victor, an old policeman who has been in the police field for many years, the president of Gotham University is also very cautious, but he has never attended the police academy and has not undergone professional anti-investigation training. and in terms of physical fitness, he is just an ordinary person, and he is much easier to deal with. One night, Batman directly infiltrated the principal's house. Although he did not find the place where Christine was kidnapped, he found that the principal's landline had several inconspicuous call records. He guessed that the kidnapping of Christine would never be the headmaster's own hands. He should have accomplices or subordinates, and it is safest to contact them through a landline, because the means of deciphering the landline call records are not available to everyone. There's no way to see what numbers this old-fashioned landline used to play. Bruce regained his student status. He made a special trip to the principal's office. His reason was very valid. He clearly wrote his homework, but Schiller still deducted his homework points. He planned to complain to the principal. In the process of communicating with the principal, Batman used professional equipment to sample the principal's voice, and then dialed the unfamiliar number through the voice changer. Batman's words are also very powerful. He didn't ask any questions, but said very vaguely, "How is man now?" The person opposite didn't seem to be a very cautious person, so he replied without thinking, "Sir, we didn't touch her according to your request, but such a beautiful girl, my subordinates can't control themselves." Quote, "If anyone has any problems, you're done," Batman said. Of course, I'll take care of them." In fact, as soon as the person on the other side opened his mouth, Batman knew that they were just a few gangsters. All gangsters in Gotham had one virtue, and Batman knew them all too well. As soon as the conversation was over, Batman locked the location of these gangsters. Although Batman's current equipment is not perfect, but the Wayne family has so many satellites hanging in the sky, it is not enough to track a mobile phone signal. Difficulty. After finding the place, Christine was really not in any danger, because the principal didn't want to use her to threaten Wayne, but to threaten her as an informant, so naturally she couldn't hurt her, otherwise, how would she go on a date with Bruce? Christine was rescued by Batman. Although she was not physically injured, she was still mentally frightened. After Batman sent him to the hospital, Christine also said that she was willing to testify in court, accusing the principal of kidnapping her. On the other hand, Victor is also not going well. In front of an old oily like Victor, Gordon is the most difficult person to deal with, who just wants to achieve justice. After all, Victor can't be in the police. The bureau yelled that it was wrong for Gordon to do justice like this, and he had to pretend to be righteous. Gordon knew in his heart what Victor was, but he still had to accompany him to act, to delay his time, to let him have no time, to destroy evidence for Jonathan, or to do something with the files. Gordon took everything related to Jonathan Press too seriously. He also solved the case itself. It is difficult for Victor to guarantee that after he destroyed the evidence in the police station, will Gordon keep his hand. Although this newcomer is reckless and difficult to deal with, he does have some skills. And Maroni, he is even more unlucky. In order to increase Maroni's sunk costs, Schiller went to the chemical plant every once in a while to destroy it. He didn't do anything major. Today, 2 parts are missing from the machine. Tomorrow, clogged drains. These little things will only be seen as inadvertent accidents, but they are very delayed. Some parts in the machine must be purchased only by the original factory, and Maroni can only buy it with great effort. Some parts are not provided by the original factory. He can only buy it from others at a higher price. After going back and forth, almost $1 million was spent, but it didn't even make a splash. Maroni believed that these problems were caused by too slow bail Jonathan. He believed that these workers were unprofessional and only Jonathan could do it, so he put pressure on Victor. When Victor was nervous, he had to go to the principal again, but the principal found that Christine, who he kidnapped, was missing, and all plans were stillborn before they started. However, Victor was eager to come to him to implement this plan. After the police chief and the principal found out that the most important person was gone, under huge pressure, they could only choose to take the risk and plan to directly kidnap Bruce. On the day Schiller accepted Bruce's invitation to go to Wayne Manor for dinner, Bruce went straight to find Schiller after class. The two of them got into the car together and planned to return directly to Wayne Manor. Gotham University is still a certain distance from Wayne Manor. Although it is not as far as the east side of the diagonal, it can be driven for at least half an hour. The only advantage of Gotham is that there is no traffic jam like New York. The roads in this ghost place are straight and wide. When you drive, you can accelerate unscrupulously. In order to show his sincerity, Bruce did not ask the driver to pick them up, but drove a car himself. It seems that he has some subtle show-off mentality. The car he drives is not that kind of bulky safety vehicle, but a beautiful Lamborghini, bright blue, very flamboyant. And just when Bruce was about to raise the speed to 140 miles per hour, a few masked men suddenly rushed out from the corner, and the black muzzle was pointed at the car. Bruce's first reaction was to turn the steering wheel. He wasn't afraid, but the professor sitting on the co-pilot had no training. He shouted, "Professor, get down." Schiller said calmly, "I'm pretty sure the car your butler ordered for you must have bulletproof glass and tires." Then he said, "If you want to determine who is behind the action, you can pretend that the vehicle is out of control and knock yourself out, and maybe you can get some clues later." Bruce could see that this group of people should have come to kidnap him, otherwise all the bullets would not have hit the lower plate of the vehicle. Bruce was a little hesitant. If he was alone, he would definitely do this, but he regarded Schiller as an ordinary person. If he was kidnapped, the kidnappers would never kill him, but not necessarily with Schiller. Schiller said, "I don't think you need to worry about me. I won't make fun of my life." Bruce finally stopped the car. He slammed the steering wheel hard, made the car spin across the road for a few laps, and finally hit the rear end on a street light, as if the brakes failed, and then he leaned on the steering wheel with his head tilted. Schiller also pretended to faint. The group of kidnappers were still a little virtuous. When they saw that Bruce was not alone in the car, they did not directly kill the killer, but even tied Schiller into the car. They were still cautious, and put hoods and handcuffs on both of them. After driving for a while, the car should have arrived in a slum. Bruce and Schiller were taken out and taken to a room. Their hoods were taken off, and Schiller and Bruce both pretended to be shocked, but then Schiller was really shocked because the principal actually walked out. He really didn't expect that the mastermind behind the scenes would dare to come out like this, not even wearing a mask, or even wearing a suit at work. Schiller was really speechless. Even if you don't know that Bruce is Batman, you reading www.uakanshu.com you cover up the 99 steps of your bad deeds, what's the difference? If he picks up Bruce and shakes it now, the tiny camera that doesn't drop 2 pounds from his body will be considered to have let down his guard. Of course, just like in the movie, the big-bellied principal started talking about his own evil plans. He said that he had prepared Bruce's stand-in for a long time. After kidnapping Bruce, he could replace him immediately, and that he originally wanted to kidnap Christine to achieve the kidnapping, but he didn't expect Bruce to be so good, only a few gunmen were needed. It worked. In his rhetoric, he explained all the crimes. In short, after making all the mistakes that the villain can make in the movie, Schiller really lost his patience with him, and he said directly, "Bruce, let's do it." Bruce jumped straight up, and the handcuffs didn't trap him at all. The headmaster stood too close, and within 2 seconds, he was held down by Bruce, and the handcuffs were brought to his own wrist. The gunmen waiting outside rushed in and were subdued by Bruce one by one. When Gordon came, the principal wanted to rely on Victor to press him, but Gordon said, "Sorry, but the principal was just last night because of the sneaked into the archives to destroy the evidence, and I was arrested on the spot, although the surveillance camera was broken by him, but Harvey put another camera there in the name of sorting the debris. The evidence is solid, man." Bruce said, "It seems that they are out of luck, and we have another person to deal with next." Schiller pulled a file out of his briefcase and said, "As we planned, I got a detailed map and staffing of the chemical plant, and I think some bodysuit weirdo could start out, already. Facts have proved that the villains at the beginning of any story are stupid to death, such as the president of Gotham University, and the police chief Victor, but if it is not the current Batman who is also fledgling, if it is really the master of his heyday, C won't even look at them. But fortunately, Maroni, the villain who appeared in the middle of the story, is still quite powerful. Before Batman could take his nest away, the production line had already started, and a large amount of fear gas was continuously produced. Schiller didn't attack this batch of fear gas from the beginning, because once he succeeded once, the other party would definitely be more vigilant. Although a large amount of fear gas is produced, it is only temporarily stored in the warehouse, because Maroni also knows that this kind of biochemical weapon must be used in large quantities at one time, and it is best to cover the entire block directly, so as to achieve the effect, maximize. It's a pity that he did this, and it hit Schiller's arms. When the 3 warehouses of the small chemical factory were basically filled with fear gas, Schiller directly opened the gray fog, flew into the warehouse in one breath, and swallowed all the fear gas concentrate. Schiller dared to do this because the gray fog told him that as a symbiote, the gray fog could directly swallow up these fearful poisonous gases and store them, without worrying about the problem of not being able to put them down. But Schiller is skeptical. It's like an alcoholic telling you that there must be no problem keeping wine in his place. Fortunately, the symbiote is relatively obedient. After he dissipated into a gray fog, he ate up all the fear gas in the warehouse almost instantly, and he didn't get drunk. There was no change in the bottle containing the fear gas. The symbiont factor penetrated into the molecular structure of the bottle and drank all the fear gas. The next day, when Moroni came to inspect the warehouse, everyone was dumbfounded. The boxes and bottles were placed there irregularly, and there was no trace of anyone entering or leaving the warehouse, but the fear gas just disappeared. Moroni knew what would happen if this kind of biochemical weapon was discovered by some people, so although this chemical factory was small in scale, the guards were very tight, especially the warehouse where a large amount of fear gas was stored. It can almost be said that it's airtight. But he couldn't expect that in the middle of the night, the security guard would still have any vigilance against the fog that suddenly drifted past, and just like that, Moroni was completely stunned. He spent millions of dollars, countless human and material resources, and owed several people's favors. It took a lot of time to get the results that were close to the door, but they were all stolen. If you say that it didn't work out at first, it's fine. Now he has invested in manpower and money, installed new equipment that he bought with millions of dollars, and hired chemists with high salaries. The Red Crow helped Huobian, dozens of good players died, and the funeral expenses were all paid. Tell me, the finished products were all stolen. Who will not vomit blood? More importantly, Moroni knew that the police and some weird Batman were eyeing him. In order to deal with these people, he used a lot of informants that he had never used before. Almost all of his intelligence network was alerted by him. Now, many informants were killed, and most of the intelligence network was destroyed. This is his decades of hard work. Just when Moroni had to continue to increase investment due to sunk costs and produce another batch of fear gas, when he went to inspect the production line again, all the instruments and bottles turned into powder. Moroni's heartbroken voice could be heard all over Gotham. The performance of the symbiote surprised Schiller very much. The symbiote told him that it was not only the fear gas, but also other things. As long as they had a molecular structure, the symbiote could split them first and mix them into their own symbiotic factors. When used, they are combined with each other to restore a complete object. This means that Schiller has a personal storage space that can put most of the common items, whether it is metal, plastic or fiber. The symbiote can be perfectly swallowed and stored, and restored when necessary. Schiller thought, low-level criminals do bad things while doing bad things, hurting others and not themselves, while those who are a little smarter will harm others and benefit themselves, doing bad things while seeking benefits. But Schiller is different from them. What he is best at is to grab huge benefits for himself while doing some good things along the way. If you can be a good person, who would want to be a bad person? In Schiller's view, those who can only harm others and benefit themselves are just not enough brains. Since you can choose to gain both fame and fortune, and you will not be condemned in conscience, why not do it? What he did this time not only completely wiped out the Red Crows, but also suffered heavy losses for the Moroni family. It also damaged the trust between the gang, the police and the Gotham City government. The first close cooperation between them, it ended with such a fiasco. No matter how stupid Thrall is, I am afraid that he will not have any cooperation with these members of Parliament and the police. And looking at the current form, Thrall, who has suffered heavy losses, doesn't want to let this group of people go. It doesn't matter if he can't find someone who steals things, he can squeeze more oil out of Victor. Before Victor could wait for the trial, he disappeared. No one knows where he went. Moroni has no time to manage Gordon's position now, so Gordon naturally became the field mission of the Gotham City Police Department. The team leader, for the first time, got real power. The president of Gotham University, who was involved in this incident, also had an accident, because Batman did not have a private prison for the time being. After he obtained the evidence, he threw the unconscious headmaster back to his office, but in the middle of the night, he was arrested. A truck crashed, and although he was rescued by the hospital, he saved his life, but he also left him with a lifelong disability. His ambitions for climbing may not be realized. The situation of the gangsters in the Eastern District became more complicated. The Red Crow gang was eliminated, and the confrontation between the two sides was broken, but the Maroney family did not have the strength to dominate the Eastern District. Several small-scale gangs have united and want to bite a piece of meat from the tiger. Of course, Maroney will not let his family's interests be swallowed up. For a while, the entire Eastern District became a battlefield for gangsters again. After a losing battle, the Maroney family could only reach an agreement with the emerging gangster family, and the two would not invade each other for the time being. It was already a huge loss, and some of the little gangsters in his jurisdiction began to disobey. Jonathan was not thrown into prison in the end, because he did have a mental illness. This is not the result of who exonerated him, but the authoritative conclusion obtained by the attending doctor of the psychiatric department of the Arkham Psychiatric Hospital. It doesn't matter whether Jonathan goes to Gotham Prison or goes to Arkham Asylum, because he is not a scarecrow yet, and he has no ability to escape from these two places. In addition, the Wayne family caught the Vermin, the owner of the Wayne chemical plant. Batman became famous in Gotham for the first time. Miss Christine was saved and suffered no substantial damage. Schiller also got it. Plenty of fear gas as a weapon. A world where only gangsters and criminals get hurt. Even if it's Principal Gotham, Director Victor, or Maroney, they are not really big bosses in the script of the Batman world. At most they are just a few cannon fodder at the beginning of the story, so they all seem to be more or less stupid, but Schiller knew that the curtain on Batman's world had not been lifted, and the truly dangerous and deranged criminals had not yet stepped onto the stage. It's just that under his interference, Batman grows faster, and maybe he will gain a greater advantage when facing his old opponents. With the prospect of the 600th world, Schiller sank to sleep again, and when he woke up, he had returned to the busy New York. But unfortunately, the first guest he saw in the morning was the last person he wanted to see. "Please sit down, Miss Natasha, and I won't say anything polite." Opposite Natasha, who is wearing casual clothes, doesn't look like a female agent, but a bit like a housewife who gets up and runs in the morning. She wears a little makeup and looks very good. Her hair is not tucked behind her, but pulled back. It doesn't look like Black Widow at all. However, this is more common sense. After all, she is wearing a black tight leather jacket with a gun and various tools pinned to her waist. When she appears in Hell's Kitchen, what awaits her must be all kinds of hidden guns, and even a bazooka. Natasha took a sip of coffee and said, "Mr. Schiller, first of all, I want to apologize to you on behalf of Coulson. We wanted to contact you at first because you were Stark's psychological counselor. Uaconshu.com, and we want to know more about Stark's troubles. After all, you know how big a conglomerate like Stark Industries would be if it collapsed. But now we are looking for you, because we really can't find a better psychiatrist than you." I have to say that this female agent has a variety of styles. She is wearing casual clothes, sitting at the table with coffee and talking about her. With her beautiful face, it is really difficult for people to feel bad about her. It seems that Black Widow is not only aggressive, she is indeed an excellent and good agent, and will change her style according to the situation. Schiller said, "You don't have to go around in circles with me. I know exactly why I left the Presbyterian Hospital, but you didn't find anything there, did you? The only thing that attracts me there is of no use to you. I just finished my research, but you made me fired because of some unprovoked guesswork. We should settle the account. We don't know the personnel arrangement of the Presbyterian Hospital, but we have a better job offer here," Natasha said. Then she took a document out of her bag and handed it to Schiller, and Natasha said, "We now formally invite you, Mr. Schiller Rodriguez, to be the special agent in the Homeland Strategic Defense Offensive and Logistics Service. Invited senior psychological counselor to provide psychological counseling services to one or more specific members of the Security Bureau." Schiller said, "I'm sorry, I don't. As you and Mr. Stark talked about, the pay is $1 million an hour." "Thank you, it's a pleasure to work with." Schiller stretched out his hand with a smile and shook it with Natasha. Compared to Gotham, New York doesn't rain often, and the weather here is always fair, but there are always a few exceptions during the year. On this day, before dawn, a drizzle fell over New York. This is not good news for the people of Hell's Kitchen. As the largest slum in Manhattan, there are no municipal benefits here. There are no diligent street sweepers. The rain will only make the streets more muddy. If you don't want your sneakers scrapped, you can only wear heavy rain boots. The odor of garbage and dust will be more pronounced in such weather. Schiller closed the windows on the first floor, and there are always a few drunkards spit in his back street, and the smell is unbearable. Suddenly, there was a crisp ring from the doorbell, and Schiller glanced at his watch. It was 6:30 a.m., too early even in fast-paced New York. When Schiller went downstairs, he saw a tall man with blonde hair and blue eyes staring at the desk calendar on his bar. Schiller said, "It seems that Natasha has really reserved an amazing person for me. People who get up before 7 o'clock this year are really rare." The man said, "So I'm very fortunate to have found a friend here." Schiller took out the file that Natasha sent him last night. He looked at the photos on the file, then looked the man up and down again, and said, "Steve Rogers, there is no time for the consultation that Shield. Cap, they're so generous, it looks like your problem should be serious." Steve shrugged and said, "They think everything is serious, including the fact that I came out without breakfast." Schiller knocked on the table and motioned him to sit down, and he said, "Then you made the right decision. Maybe the Shield people didn't tell you. If you come at dinner time, I don't mind treating you to dinner." Quote. Steve smiled, his handsome face looked handsome and cheerful. Schiller made an American breakfast of toast, fried bacon, 2 sausages, 2 large hash browns, and 2 cups of coffee. Steve wasn't actually hungry, but the smell of breakfast was really fragrant. He picked up the bread and asked, "Do you have butter?" Schiller looked at him in surprise and said, "Oh, only strawberry jam." Then he looked Steve up and down and said, "Looks like you're an old school guy, and there aren't many people who put butter on bread these days." Steve said, "It's okay, it's just that I'm not used to eating such sweet jam for breakfast." "Then let me bring you some sauce, I made it myself." Schiller took out a jar and handed it to Steve. Steve took another look at the coffee cup, which was about the size of a bottle cap, and the strong espresso inside, and said, "I'm sorry, but can I have an Americano?" "Americano? Actually, you can just ask me for a cup of water," Schiller said. On the other side, Natasha, who was listening, said into the walkie-talkie, "The monitoring object calls American coffee dirty water, and suspects that it may have Italian ancestry." Steve wasn't angry, he just waved his hand and said, "Hey, don't say that, I just think concentration is bad for the heart." Before he could finish his words, Schiller even made 2 cups of espresso, then took a big bite of chocolate, and the symbiote hummed happily in his mind. Schiller sat across from Steve, and the two started having breakfast together. "At first Nick told me to ask me to come to the slum to find a psychiatrist. I didn't understand it. Isn't Shield's own doctor good enough?" Steve said. "But now, I find that the atmosphere here is much better than those white and dazzling psychological counseling rooms of Shield. It's more like a courtroom than a counseling room." "Who can judge you?" Schiller asked. "Trial Captain America." Steve smiled helplessly, and said, "It's all old Huang Li, including myself. I think Shield should also very much want you to go to their own counseling room, but I'm afraid they themselves know that it won't solve your problem there." Schiller put down his fork and said, "Did you come from the street outside? What do you think of this place? I mean, this slum?" Steve pursed his lips and said, "I don't know how to describe it. It's scary here because there's no change here. It was the same way in the slums when I lived, dirty and smelly gutters, full of drunken vomit, dead drunks leaning on the corner of the building, and gangsters couldn't get a single penny out of their pockets. Son, even children are habitually touching people's pockets and never learn well. Many years have passed, and it's still the same here, nothing has changed. What do you think should have changed over the past few decades?" Schiller asked after taking a bite of the bread. Steve spread his hands and said, "Even if we can't eradicate slums, we should make him smaller or better." Schiller shook his head and said, "You won the war, Captain America, you did win against those gangsters, we won, and the just war has ended for many years. You think victory should bring many benefits, such as a more prosperous society, a better life for people, and you were willing to fight to the last moment for those who are suffering, and you did." Schiller shook his head gently and said, "After decades, when you wake up again, you find that this world is not like this, and it has not become what you envisioned before you died. It became white, but it became gray, a color you can't read. Steve pursed his lips and looked a little silent, and Schiller said, I know your problem is not what S.H.I.E.L.D. thinks at all, sleeping for too long, being out of touch with society, not knowing how to use mobile phones, listening to the radio, working and resting at all. Small problems like too much regularity. For Captain America, as long as he wants to learn, there are no tools in modern society that he can't learn. If he can't learn, it's only because he doesn't want to learn. You are resisting this era, unwilling to accept it, unwilling to accept the fact that the results of your hard work are not as good as you expected. Steve said bitterly, I have tried my best, even if the result is not good enough, I am trying to accept it. But the saddest thing for me is that during the war, if people are not doing well, then I will go beat my enemies and beat them no matter the cost, but right now, people are not doing well, and I don't know who the opponent is. Perhaps you have ever thought that your era has passed, and then the era of you being responsible for people has passed. You don't need to become a war machine anymore. Then what should I do? I should do something, right? Captain America, you're so compassionate, so even if I suggest you pursue your hobbies, like drawing cartoons, doing sports, you won't let go of the suffering of these people and just focus enjoy yourself. You are not such a person, so I will not give you such useless advice. I believe the psychiatrist of S.H.I.E.L.D. also told you that. Are there still people in this world who don't enjoy life? They think so from the bottom of their hearts, they think if they were like you, they would fly away right away. I went on vacation to Hawaii, and S.H.I.E.L.D. paid for it anyway. Ordinary people can't understand your excess sympathy and sense of responsibility, and of course you don't have to worry about their incomprehension. Steve took it seriously, he felt that someone finally understood him, and he complained, they think I have a lot of things to do, such as fitness, watching movies, playing game consoles, but the things I have to do it's not that. I show resistance and they think I'm too out of date to play this stuff. But maybe you can change your way of thinking, don't seek understanding from ordinary people. The world is so big, you are not a good person in this era, but there are good people in every era, you can go to them, these are the same as you have once saved those who have lived the world, or are saving the world, will understand you. Schiller said. Also, the good people of this era are not immune to trouble. They don't live as long as you, and they don't have as much experience as you. They may have power, but they don't know how to use it, and they may have passion. It lacks skill, and it may be scattered and ununited. You can go and find these people. Your era has passed, but the earth is still going to turn, and there are still people who continue to fight to save the world, right? Steve sighed and said, I'm an outdated veteran who doesn't want to get off the line. You're right, Doctor, it's time for those recruits to go to the battlefield. But I have some doubts, can I really help? After all, it seems that the rules of the world's operation are completely different from those in war. I have someone here that I have to recommend to you. He is a lucky boy, and his experience is very similar to yours. He was originally just an otaku who was bullied in school. Suddenly, one day, he gained great power and began to jumping up and down the city, not doing anything serious. You know, how dangerous it would be to suddenly gain huge power. It is no exaggeration to say that his power is still growing, and dozens of well-trained special forces, www.mtlnovel.com, may not be him, opponent. Steve couldn't sit still immediately, he said, indeed, I just received the transformation, and I couldn't control my strength. I accidentally injured 2 medical staff. Where is he now? Where is he? Hospital. He is still in school. He is about to take the final exam and is reviewing. My God, why is he still in school? He patted the table angrily, and said to the monitoring equipment on the table, Hey, Nick, what did you do? How can you keep a transformation fighter at school? If he can't control his power, how many people will be injured? Quote. Steve stood up, and Schiller waved his hand at him and said, I said, he is a lucky boy, he is different from you, not a modified person with drugs, but a special mutation, the power grows gradually, rather than becoming uncontrollable in one go. I mean, this kind of teenage guy, you know, is arrogant and sensitive, impulsive and timid, someone needs to teach him well, it's better to let him see the sinister society. Steve squeezed his fist and said, Indeed, I've seen many recruits like this. They want to rush to the battlefield with their blood. When they see the bombing and grenades, they are scared and screaming. They are still far away. Woolen cloth. Schiller said. It is estimated that he will finish the exam tomorrow night, and he will definitely come out to wander. You can stop him and then beat him up. Don't worry, his mutation ability is very strong, and it is not a big deal to be beaten. Steve was even gearing up, which reminded him of the days on the battlefield. Those young recruits, who were rectified by the captain one by one, screamed. Watching the recruits collapsed was one of the few in his military career, let him a moment of relaxation and joy. I've never seen such a nasty guy as him. I dare say that if he was on the battlefield, he would have been shot by his superiors countless times. Steve paced back and forth in the middle of the living room of Schiller's psychiatric clinic. He was on his hips, waving his fists, and loudly expressing his views. He looked like an angry lion, and his military temperament was fully revealed. Steve said, I really should give him a hug and fall to see if his iron shell is as brittle as glass. Why is Steve so angry? We have to start from last night. Last night, Peter finished his final exam. Of course, he wanted to go to New York. He was almost suffocated for the past few weeks. He missed the cool breeze above New York, a feeling of. But recently, his relationship with Gwen has been heating up very quickly. After the exam, Gwen invited him to the party as a matter of course. Gwen felt that Peter was a little too autistic and should communicate with his classmates more, so he chose to pull him. Let's go to the after-exam party together. Peter really wanted to be a superhero, but he really liked Gwen so much in Wenru Township and Hero Zomba. There was nothing he could do. In the end, Peter agreed to Gwen's invitation, and the two went to the party happily. It can be expected that the little spider will come out to hang out after the exam, not only Schiller, but also the genius Tony Stark. Stark had a serious business with little spider. The spider silk launcher developed by Peter made Stark see his scientific research potential. He planned to talk to Peter and let him come to Stark Group for an internship during his vacation. Stark can also make him a spider suit, by the way. Although Stark is very arrogant, he also has his own sense of proportion. He knows that he can't go to Little Spider's school in a steel battle suit. The two will be able to meet again over New York City. He had a good plan, but unfortunately, Peter chose the former between romance and superhero career. Iron Man wandered over New York for a while, but he didn't see the figure swinging between the tall buildings. Although he didn't meet Spider-Man, by coincidence, another person who was also looking for Spider-Man's figure was bumped into by him. Captain America can even jump between high-rise buildings without the help of spider silk. He is not the same as Peter's hairy boy. Captain America's strength has been tempered and he has more control over his body than anyone else. Before he could find the boy who was swinging in Schiller's mouth, he saw a very flamboyant mecha in red and gold flying to his side. Steve stopped on the roof of a tall building. The mecha was suspended in midair, and a voice came from the opposite side. Look, where is this little hero from? It's not enough to have a spider boy swinging around in New York. What's your code name? Aryan Superman. Steve said, I thought modern people would be more polite, so who are you? The Steel Warrior in the turtle shell. You don't know Iron Man. Where are you from? Don't tell me, you are fascinated by the brilliance of my cool mecha, haha. Iron Man is indeed famous in New York now. Although Stark's rescue is often simple and rude, his mecha is really cool, and countless bystanders have recorded Iron Man's heroic figure. There's even a small group of fans that has organized a website, which has given him national fame. I'm really an oldie, Steve said. But at least you know that people need to be polite. Shouldn't you tell me your name before you speak? Stark doesn't care to reveal his true identity, because he can also see that the person in front of him also has special abilities. After all, ordinary people can't jump more than 10 meters. Since everyone is in the same industry, there is nothing to expose, he said. As you can see, I am Stark. Other than the owner of Stark Industries, who else can develop such a powerful mecha? Quote. Steve's expression suddenly changed, and he said, Are you Stark? Your surname is Stark. Then what's your relationship with Howard Stark? The mecha on the opposite side fell, and he said, Don't mention that name to me, you weirdo. What does that have to do with me? You have nothing to do with him, but you inherited Stark Industries. Steve's expression became even weirder. Before Stark could continue to sneer, he was hit by a huge force and flew out. Indeed, Captain America is not the current little spider. In the comics, he has broken Stark's mecha more than once. The current Stark's mecha has not been modified and upgraded several times. Iron Man, he's far from his peak, but Captain America, he's always been at his peak. A string of sparks exploded directly inside the Mark V. Jarvis was calling the police in an emergency. Stark was shocked and wanted to control the mecha to break free. He had never encountered such a monster before. The shell of the high-grade metal alloy becomes as crisp as a cookie. Steve hugged his waist and pressed Stark to the ground, and then he waved his fist. The mecha's mask was shattered in a few punches. Jarvis called the police frantically, and Stark shouted angrily, "Direct electric shock." Jarvis said, "The burst of electricity will cause the mecha to be scrapped." I said, "Directly launch the electric shock." With a bang, the whole body of Mark V emitted a flashing electric light, and Steve was directly knocked out. Stark was even more uncomfortable. He was ejected by the mecha and fell to the ground. Both of them became numb and black, and their hair that had been electrocuted stood up. "You thief," Steve said. Stark said, "You lunatic. Why did you suddenly act? I don't even know you. But old Stark and I are friends." Steve stood up quickly, grabbed Stark by the collar, and said, "How on earth did you get Stark Industries? Where did Howard's descendants go? What happened to him?" Jarvis suddenly said in Stark's earphone, "According to the micro-expression analysis logic provided by Mr. Schiller, there may be a huge misunderstanding." Stark turned off his headphones and said, "In the current situation, do you still need to read micro-expressions?" He looked at Steve, and although he was grabbed by the collar, he still shook his head proudly and said, "I doubt if you don't understand English. When did I say that I have nothing to do with Howard?" Steve looked at him like an idiot, as if he were a forgetful Alzheimer's patient. "I said it, but I didn't mean it that way." Stark turned his eyes to the side, and he reluctantly admitted, "He is my father, but my genius creation has nothing to do with him." Steve raised his hand forward and threw Stark to the ground, causing him to scream in pain. Steve crossed his arms and said, "You don't look like Howard at all. Your father was a heroic warrior, and do you know how annoying you are?" Indeed, Stark's arrogance has been engraved in his bones, and anyone who sees him will not think that he is a good person to get along with. Stark sat up, and he said loudly, "Are you hysterical? How could you possibly know my father? Could it be from a previous life?" Steve didn't bother to explain to him that after coming out tonight, he didn't meet the target he was looking for, but he met Howard's offspring, and the offspring of his old friend looked crooked, which made Steve feel very upset. Suddenly, Steve heard a gust of wind, but he was immersed in thinking and reacted a little slower. A mecha directly hugged him and rushed out, throwing him downstairs. At this height, Captain America couldn't fall to death. The landing, Steve rolled twice, and then saw Stark on the roof, looking at him mockingly, and then the new mecha was armed on him. Rising up, Stark said, "It seems that you may indeed be friends with my father. After all, my friends are not as slow as you." After speaking, he flew away. An angry Steve slammed the ground hard. So there was a scene where Steve scolded Stark in Schiller's psychological clinic. You reading www.uakanshu.com. If Stark was just a stranger, then Steve certainly wouldn't be so angry, but he and Howard fought side by side, and thinking that the old man's son has become like this, Steve is angry and a little bit ashamed, feeling that they did not fulfill their educational responsibilities. After Steve left, Coulson called Schiller. "Dr. Schiller, I have to admit that my previous compliments may have been polite, but they are definitely not now." "Captain," he suddenly became in high spirits. As soon as he came back, he ran to the training room and beat up more than a dozen coaches. Chief Nick talked to him about the preparation of the Special Operations team. He also agreed immediately, and even asked the Bureau to give he prepares a special training room. "My God, Captain America, he's reborn." Schiller smiled and said, "The emotions that drive people to be positive don't have to be a sense of responsibility or ideals, but they may also be anger." Coulson said inexplicably, "The captain looks a little angry. What's wrong with him? Is there any trouble?" "He does have a little trouble, but that's not something you can solve." After speaking, Schiller hung up the phone. His doorbell rang. Peter was wearing a school uniform jacket, carrying a school bag, opened the door of the clinic, waved at Schiller and said, "Hey, doctor, you can't believe it. What a great party I just attended. Schiller looked at him. Peter was obviously drinking. He should have just returned from the party. He was probably drunk and didn't dare to go home, so he ran to him. Schiller said, "You really have to thank Stark. He took a beating for you." Little Spider said dumbfounded, "What? So you decided to intern at Stark Group?" Schiller asked. Peter took a big mouthful of porridge, took a bite of the sausage, and said as he chewed, "Yes, so I can explain where the money comes from on me, and I told my uncle that the Stark Group wanted to buy out my money. Employment opportunities. Not only will they give me a lot of money in advance, but they will also be responsible for my college tuition." "Does your uncle believe it?" Peter said. "Actually, Uncle Ben has always known that I have good grades in studies and have some genius minds. Now I finally get a chance, and he is very happy for me." "But," Peter put the bowl down and said a little embarrassedly, "Mr. Schiller, I want to stay with you for a few days. Our house is in disrepair. Uncle and Aunt May got the money. After that, I wanted to renovate the house a little bit. After all, it rained a few days ago, and even the skin of the outer wall fell off. They would borrow it from their old classmates, but I was almost an adult, which was a little inconvenient." Quote, "I welcome you here," said Schiller. "But doesn't Stark's internship provide accommodation? It's still a little far from Stark Group." Peter sighed and said, "But the Stark Group is farther from Gwen's house." Schiller smiled and said, "I bet you came to me because you failed in trying to stay at Gwen's house." Peter's face turned red, and he said, "How could I make such an unreasonable request? I wouldn't say such a thing to Gwen. You really don't look like an American by being conservative." Schiller also took a mouthful of porridge and said. Before the two of them had finished their breakfast, Steve ran and walked in. There was a little sweat on his forehead. Obviously, he should have run all the way. As soon as he came in, he smelled the fragrance of Schiller's porridge. He touched his stomach and said, "I want to tell you, man, you are better than the canteen of S.H.I.E.L.D., I don't know how strong you are." Schiller pointed to the kitchen, and Steve went to make the porridge by himself. Peter turned back and forth, chewing the sweetness in his mouth like a hamster, sticking his head out and asking Schiller in a low voice, "Who is that? He looks so handsome, stronger than the captain of my high school football team. Obviously, he's the one who beat up Stark, and of course, he was going to beat you, because you're hanging around New York all day," Schiller said. Peter was choked, and when Steve came over with the bowl, Peter moved his chair aside without a trace. It's impossible for the current little spider to beat Captain America, and Peter is obviously very self-aware. He also knows that his high-profile behavior before has caused many people's dissatisfaction, and there are more than one or two who want to beat him. And Stark, who has the ability to beat him, is one. Now it seems that this strong man should also be one. After all, if he can beat Stark, he must be a master. As soon as Steve's eyes fell on Peter, Peter jumped up like he was electrocuted and said, "I'll pack the porridge into the lunch box, and I'll take it to Matt at the hospital later." "I advise you not to go here," Schiller said. "You forgot, last time you went there in the morning, how embarrassing was it to see Matt and his girlfriend lying on the same bed." Peter's face turned red again, and he muttered, "It's a hospital there, and Matt's injuries haven't healed yet. They're really crazy." Steve silently drank 2 mouthfuls of porridge, and then asked Schiller, "Is that Matt one of the good people you mentioned?" Schiller nodded and said, "I can't even describe him as a good guy, he's a hero, a real hero." Schiller and Steve briefly talked about Matt's life, and Steve said with some sighs, "Maybe I can't compare to him, because when I was an ordinary person, although I couldn't understand a lot of things, I didn't like it. I didn't have the courage to stop it because I knew I couldn't beat those people, and getting hurt would definitely hurt." Schiller said, "It is human nature to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages, so those who advance against the wind are more worthy of respect." After Peter went to pack up, Steve asked, "This kid doesn't look like he has any superpowers at all. You know, even in my era, you don't blush when you talk about girlfriends." Piece of pizza. Before Peter came, Schiller lowered his voice and said, "Just being a girlfriend is not enough to make him so embarrassed. His father-in-law is the chief of the New York City Police Department." Steve frowned and said, "Didn't you say he's a lucky boy? I don't think he can handle such a father-in-law." When Peter went to deliver Matt's meal and he came back, Schiller wasn't in the clinic, and Steve was sitting alone at the bar, playing with an old-fashioned record player. Although it was an old-fashioned record player for this day and age, it was a novelty in Steve's day, so he was a little confused about how to put discs in. Peter said, "You can't pull that barn door like this, it will break it. Give me the disc and I'll help you put it in." Steve handed him the disc player and said, "The doctor is going to give that start to psychotherapy. How old are you this year? Are you graduating from high school?" While playing with the record player, Peter shook his head and said, "Not yet, I'm just a sophomore in high school." "I heard Schiller say that you are very lucky and have acquired some special abilities." But Peter pouted and said, "Are you lucky? Maybe I thought so before, but now it seems that it's not all. You're a little more mature than I thought. I thought you'd be bragging, or couldn't wait to show something. If I would have done that a month ago, well, here it is, you just need to press the button above and it will play, and now there are not many people who use this thing, and it happens that my uncle also has one, that's why I use it." Steve pressed the button, smiled and said, "Then do you know how to use a vinyl record player?" "I still know more about that." Peter shook his head and said, "That thing is too old. I have seen it once at my uncle's colleague's house, but that vinyl record is always stuck and no one can fix it." "Then you can ask for it, and I'll fix it. I'm very good at this job. In the army, this kind of thing is a precious thing. If it breaks, you will definitely hear a scream. Are you a soldier? But I can see that you are really strong, you should be at least a Master Chief." Peter said. "Master Chief. That's about it. I have a special operations team under my command, and I will lead them on missions." Only then did Peter become interested. He said, "Are you a Special Forces soldier? Which number do you belong to? SEALs, or sharp knives?" Steve smiled and said, "We like to call ourselves the Patriots, but you should have heard a louder name." Peter was a little curious. He said, "What is that?" "Captain America and his friends." Peter opened his mouth wide, his eyes widened, and said, "You used to be in Captain America's squad, my God. That must have been almost 100 years ago, you." "Oh, yes, indeed, the captain is not an ordinary person. Some of them must have lived until now. So you know the captain. God." Peter ran to the back room in a hurry, took out his backpack, and after rummaging around, took out a figure from it. He said, "Look, this is the latest bottle cap figure that they cooperated with the soda company. I drank 2 full cases of soda to get this. It's the only one with a shield in all styles. I was at a party a few days ago. They all envy me, it's way more showy than a break dance or something." Steve narrowed his eyes and looked at the small figure. He took it and turned around, and found that the head of the figure seemed to move. He shook his fingers slightly, but it seemed to be too hard. The little man's head snapped off with a snap, and Peter shouted and rushed up to grab it back. "My God, it's broken. Glue. I need glue. It took me 2 months to collect this." "I'm sorry, Steve said, "I haven't played with this thing, I thought it could move." "Oh, it doesn't matter. If you are indeed from 7 or 80 years ago, the toys at that time were indeed much stronger than now, such as Lego. There should be Lego at that time, right?" Steve didn't get angry when he saw Peter. He felt that Schiller's description of this kid was not very accurate. Although he was a bit exasperating and childish, he could indeed take on a big responsibility. He said, "I think you should take a closer look at that little thing's head, doesn't it look familiar to you?" Peter picked up the head of the little figure with some doubts. He had to say that although the quality of this figure was not very good, the carving was very fine. Then Steve looked at the big boy across from him, looked down at the statue, looked up at him, looked down at the statue, looked up at him again, and then his eyes gradually became round, and his mouth was so wide that his jaw could be dislocated. When Schiller came back with Pikachu in his arms, he encountered such a scene. Pikachu waved his short hand in his arms and said, "It seems that it is not the right time for us to come back," disturbing the reunion of Jack and Ruth after a long absence. Schiller rubbed his face and said, "Tell you to watch less romance movies, www.mtlnovel.com. Peter turned his eyes to Schiller again, and stumblingly asked him for proof. "He is. I mean, that." Schiller pressed the button of the record player. There was a melodious old song. He tapped Steve on the shoulder and said, "Captain, it seems that he really wants to ask you for evidence." "Yes, I see what he meant." The captain knocked on the table at the bar and said, "Where's my evidence?" Natasha's sweet voice came from inside. here comes. Before Peter could react, after a gust of wind, a shiny red and blue shield with a 5-pointed star in the middle flew in. Steve caught the shield with one hand, and Peter said intently, "That's cool." Outside the door, Natasha Yee said lazily on the door frame, "Welcome back, Captain." Steve patted the shield and said, "Looks like you guys are ready." Schiller said to Natasha, "Okay, the sensational old story, we can talk about it later. The 2-day consultation fee is $5 million US. When will it arrive?" Steve glanced at him and said, "Are you really going to charge so much money? Otherwise, I asked you to set up bugs here again, and to steal food. Is it because you are Captain America? I thought we were friends," Steve said. "Of course, if we weren't friends, I could only buy one breakfast with $5 million. You paid the same price to that Stark?" Steve asked. "Next time I'll charge him double." Steve immediately turned his head, looked at Natasha, and said, "Pay me, and give me an extra 10% tip." Schiller's consideration of Peter's coming to live in was a little too superficial. It is true that Spider-Man is kind, brave and determined, but at the same time, Peter also has the problems that big boys of this age have, such as day and night, indulging in games, not sleeping at night, and not getting up in the morning. It may be the reason for the spider's mutation. Peter has a big appetite and is addicted to all kinds of American burgers and fried chicken. Schiller feels that if this goes on, he will become fat from spiders to crabs. Schiller knocked on the edge of the pot and said, "Listen, I don't care how much stamina you have spent with Steve recently, but no human being can eat 5 pots of rice and then want to have another bucket of porridge." Quote. Peter put down his job, touched his stomach and said, "I never dreamed that I could eat so much food before. I suspect that there is a black hole in my stomach." Matt limped through the door. His injury was not completely healed. Peter quickly stood up to help him. Matt said, "He is growing now, he should eat more, but boy, you have to promise me, after eating, hurry up to exercise. If you don't want to get fat into a ball, you'd better not stay in your room all day and play games." Schiller also picked up Pikachu and said, "I guess it's you who broke Peter, whether it's eating so much in one go, or playing games with the controller every day." Pikachu retorted in a Deadpool voice, "How can you blame me? This sticky boy is as thin as bean sprouts, and he is very good at games. Every time I play a fight with him, I have to let him one hand, and armed raids, you cut more onions in the morning than he will target the enemy." Before Pikachu could finish speaking, Peter covered his mouth, and Schiller said, "There is no more rice in the clinic, so I can only buy it tomorrow, so you can take care of your own dinner tonight." Peter let out a whimper, and Schiller wiped the water droplets on his hands and said, "Not only your dinner, but mine too." "Are we going out to eat?" Peter asked. "Of course, and I have a good place. This is one of the entry benefits they provide me. I heard that the food there is not very delicious, but I must be full." "Humph." Peter let out a contemptuous snort and said, "Then they are still too young. I feel like I can swallow 10 cows now." The International Defense Headquarters of SHIELD is located in New York. The entrance is in a phone booth not far from Manhattan, but after entering the phone booth, the elevator will turn around and don't know where to go. Schiller had a gray fog sensor system, and he vaguely felt that he was approaching the suburbs before the elevator stopped. Schiller and Peter both got off the elevator, and Coulson stood in front of them to welcome them and said, "As you can see, welcome to the International Reception Center of SHIELD, which specializes in reception, all kinds of external employees of SHIELD, members, and a home for elite field agents." Schiller looked at his watch and said, "I think you should honor the benefits written on the contract when you joined the company. Yes, the staff canteen is always free, and coffee is also free, but the espresso here may not meet the standard you want. If you have high requirements for coffee, I can make a report to the head." Coulson smiled. Said, No need." Schiller waved his hand and said, "I really don't have any hope for the coffee taste of people who like to drink a glass of water." Coulson led Schiller and Peter through the hall, and then through the living area. The decoration here is not too heavy in sci-fi style, but more like a minimalist Nordic style. It also uses a lot of fabric decoration. It's quite comfortable. Peter looked up and down, a little disappointed, and said, "I thought you would be working in an alien spaceship-like place." "Ah, the International Defense Headquarters and some scientific research headquarters are like that, but this is just a reception center. It's a place for field agents to eat and rest. Do you think it's a good idea to stay in the alien spaceship 24 hours a day? Although Peter didn't answer, he could see that it really didn't quite meet his expectations for S.H.I.E.L.D. Coulson is a person, he said. If you officially join S.H.I.E.L.D., you will have the opportunity to go to the headquarters, which will surprise you. Before Peter could ask, they came to the restaurant, which was a bit like science fiction, because there was no cook, but rows of food were placed on various conveyor belts and turned out from various windows. A buffet? Schiller asked. General agents don't have much time to wait for the cook to cook, so it's all a buffet, but you can rest assured that dishes from all over the world can be found here, and they all taste pretty good. Exactly what I want, said Schiller. Peter touched his stomach, and Schiller patted his shoulder and said, Go, Peter, I think you can make them regret giving me this entry benefit. Coulson smiled and said, S.H.I.E.L.D. is not so poor that the agents can't get enough to eat. Go, kid, you can't eat as fast as the assembly line here. Schiller smiled slightly. 3 hours later, Natasha took the phone and walked in through the door. She scolded the headache. Don't you know I'm on a mission to follow Stark? Also, what nonsense are you talking about? God, when has the S.H.I.E.L.D. changed the contract? Is there any contract that we can't provide? Do you need me to come back and change it now? While on the phone, she walked quickly to the restaurant. She pushed open the door and said, Coulson, you better give me a valid reason, or I will definitely complain to the director that you interfere with my work. As soon as she finished speaking, she saw the pile of plates in the middle of the dining room. This is not an exaggerated adjective, but a fact. The entire ring-shaped restaurant is very large, about several thousand square meters, but at this time, the middle of the restaurant has been blocked. The reason is that there are a lot of plates in the middle, straight it reached the ceiling like a huge pyramid. The pile of plates was at least 3 people tall, and dozens of people couldn't hold it with their hands, and looking at the situation on the field, it seemed that they hadn't finished eating. Natasha stepped over a pile of food wreckage and patted a smoking food delivery robot. She said in shock, What's wrong? Nick Fury is finally planning to raise dinosaurs in S.H.I.E.L.D. Quote. Coulson leaned weakly on a bar and said, The employee meal benefits in the contract should really be changed. Natasha looked up and down the pile of plates with her eyes and said, I remember this one, but the employee himself can't bring outsiders, right? How many people did he bring? Shouldn't there be a company? Coulson stretched out his hand, and Natasha went around the stack of dishes and found that there were only 2 figures, 2 big and 1 small. Peter had already lost the battle. Leaning back on the chair and dozing off, Pikachu was slightly down, but he still threw the plates to the top of the plate mountain one after another. Only Schiller, who has the gray fog, is not afraid of not being able to eat so much food, or he just packed the food into the gray fog and stored it, but it was decomposed and he didn't eat it at all. To put it simply, he came here to buy goods. Of course, Gray Mist was also very happy to eat some desserts with chocolate, syrup and pickled fruits. He ate at least dozens of kilograms. Schiller made an exception to let him drink a little bit of fear gas concentrate. At this moment, in Schiller's mind, he happily recycles the magical divine comedy he learned on TV. Natasha blinked, but she didn't say anything for a while. Hey, is the restaurant open? I just came back from a run, and there's basil beef tonight. As soon as Captain America opened the door, he was also stunned, and he said in shock, I knew that decades ago, Nick told me that he wanted to raise elephants, but I didn't expect that he planned to achieve it now. This wish. Coulson didn't say a word, covered his face, raised his arm. Captain America also walked around the stack of plates, and saw the 3 people who had eaten their shells. Well, Captain America pursed his lips, hesitated for a moment, then looked at Natasha and said, Don't tell me, they have eaten up all the food in the restaurant. Natasha gave a smirk that didn't smile. She slapped the food delivery robot next to her on the head, and a panel popped up. After reading it, she said, Very well, we can now decide which restaurant to go to for dinner in New York, and by the way, consider where to eat tomorrow morning and tomorrow at noon. Schiller stood up as if he was nothing, and said, Thank you for your hospitality. I think the employee benefits here are really good. Unfortunately, today is a bit rushed. After all, I have a friend who is hungry. I have to pack some for him. Lunch come here first. Natasha stopped him and said, Although S.H.I.E.L.D. can't afford to pay for the food, you have to give us some time to stock up when you eat here. During the stocking period, Other agents can if you don't have anything to eat. Do you have the heart to make your colleagues go hungry? Steve said, can't you see that? Of course he has the heart. He even has the heart to starve his friends. I was going to have a big steak, but it looks like I can't even eat a single French fries. Quote. Schiller snapped his fingers. Pikachu put down the last piece of beef patty. He jumped on Schiller's shoulder. Schiller said with a smile, I have a good place to recommend to you. It's an entry benefit for my other job. Although the food there is not very tasty, you must be full. Natasha and Steve narrowed their eyes together. 5 hours later, Stark looked at the pile of plates in the middle of his staff cafeteria. He opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. Jarvis spoke next to him, saying, I don't think you want to hear the detailed food loss now, but I have to say that if no new food reserves arrive before 10 o'clock, then the whole company will be damaged tomorrow. The employees can only starve. Kanshu www.uakanshu.com. Stark took a deep breath. He could already imagine that Pepper would be angry with him when he complained to a large number of employees tomorrow. He was wearing battle armor, clanking through the stack of plates, then looked at a few people who were leaning over their chairs and turned their stomachs, and said, very well, you have caused Stark Industries to have its first food crisis in 100 years. If Pepper gets mad at me tomorrow, I'll definitely punch you all. Schiller said, don't be nervous, we'll just go by it. It's almost 9 o'clock now. Where do you ask the purchasing staff to buy things? And our transport trucks are out of service. How do we transport them when we buy them? Please, a Captain America, 2 super agents, a Spider-Man and an Iron Man, can't you still carry a little food? 2 hours later, everyone flew back in large and small bags. Stark never dreamed that the first task of the superhero team was to go to the nearest supermarket, buy a lot of food, and then fly back alone carrying countless shopping bags. Stark scolded while flying. Don't let my fans see Iron Man's embarrassment, please. Am I a nanny robot? Or a housewife rice cooker? Just as he finished speaking, a flash of light came on. The next day, the front page headline of the New York Times was that Iron Man had more than a dozen large shopping bags hanging all over his body, and the 2 people behind him who were flying between tall buildings also hung big bags of various family-sized food. And Pepper, she yelled at Stark from the top floor of the Stark building, you busy. The high gluten flour you bought back made all the bread and cakes in employee meals look like rubber bands. Just as hard. You said you were going to close Stark's weapons manufacturing department. Schiller asked. But you shouldn't come to me about this, Schiller continued. Stark covered his forehead with some distress, and said, because of the good things you have done, Pepper has received thousands of employee complaints in the past few days, and she has to redesign the entire employee benefits system, and she is very busy. Quote. Actually that's not the point, Schiller said. If you want to talk, she's always willing to listen. Stark touched the bridge of his nose and didn't answer. After a while he said, well, I know how much pressure this decision will put on her. I know I'm a selfish fool. I know, she's helped me enough. I know it shouldn't be, but I have no choice. Schiller spread out the notebook in his hand, and he wrote as he wrote, let me think about it. What you want to do now is like a death sentence for a gun. But my weapon killed a lot of people. We have no choice for weapons, Schiller said. Can't you expect them all to be like Jarvis? They'll open their mouths, they'll protest to you. Do you think they'd love to go to that part of Afghanistan? Or do you think that a bullet is produced in its life the ideal is to kill others on the battlefield? Stark sat across from him in silence. He said weakly, I admit that I blamed all this on the weapon because I knew that I was the culprit, but I couldn't judge myself. But I also know that, Mr. Stark, you can't judge yourself, not because you want to survive, but because you think you have the ability to make up for it all. When there is a crisis, only you have the ability to save the world, to turn the tide, and out of this sense of responsibility, you did these things. But I say bluntly, have you ever thought that you must find a responsible person or thing for a matter and judge them? It is actually a rather arbitrary and reckless idea. But when something happens, there is always its source. But the root cause is not necessarily right or wrong. You should know better than me that the world is not black and white. You found this thing that you think should be responsible, and it didn't make the whole thing any better. You think weapons should be responsible. So you want to shut down the entire weapons department, and then put Pepper out of sleep for a few nights, put a lot of employees out of work, and even those on the battlefield won't appreciate you. Is the pain of getting to the bottom of this really worth it? Stark's performance was very painful, and the facial features of his entire face were almost wrinkled together. If Spider-Man's transformation is like a grand fireworks, then Stark's transformation may be a final star. Collapse inward. Now Stark doesn't know what kind of dispute he will have with Steve over the same issue, thereby destroying the entire Avengers. My brain told me I couldn't help thinking about right and wrong, Stark said. Well, in this case, your brain has to be responsible for it. It doesn't want to let you go, so you should go to its trouble. This is the theory you insist on, isn't it? Ask your brain, is there any way to achieve what you want without hurting those around you? That's the answer he should give you, because that's what makes you so miserable. Stark didn't feel any better. He stretched back on the chair and said, Look, I'm an idiot. I hired a devil doctor, a Satan. Your psychiatry has never brought me any positive changes, and every time I leave you, it gets worse. Stark almost gritted his teeth. Schiller rarely joked with him. He said, You can use me as a catalyst, you will understand later. Thinking will bring pain. No one can exempt you from the custom. Get a needle in advance for you. You will be much better in the future. You will thank me. Stark drew a cross on his chest, and he said, If you keep talking like this, you will almost surpass Howard's place in my heart. This is the first time I heard you mention your father, but it's very strange. When people are in pain, they prefer to call their mother. Stark thumped the table hard, and he didn't want to admit that he mentioned his father because he was uncomfortable. He is not some fledgling bird who needs shelter, the eagle that flew off the cliff and never came back, nor is he the person he should think of when he is in despair and pain. Schiller said, Perhaps because of this, you will make Mecca for yourself. Wherever you wear that iron shell, you think that only it can protect you, and only when you wear it, you are the best. Mighty Iron Man. But I have to say, if you can't learn to take it off, you'll never be a real Iron Man. Schiller had thought about it before. Stark and Batman are really a bit similar, their upbringings and educational backgrounds are bizarrely similar, and when they face certain problems, the methods they choose are surprisingly consistent. I made myself a bunch of weapons that no one could make, and then armed them with my body. I felt that I was extremely powerful, and then I fell into a painful struggle when I realized that this could not solve all problems. Schiller was writing and drawing in the notebook, and Stark said, What are you writing? Steve's psychiatric treatment is temporarily over, so Natasha put the monitor back, and I have to write you a handwritten case. Stark narrowed his eyes and said, Did you write down everything I said just now? Nothing else, but I remember the sentence you called Dad very clearly. $5 million. Schiller threw the notebook directly in front of Stark. Stark picked up the lighter and lit it. He cursed in a low voice, How could I believe the evil of a vampire doctor? It's getting late. It's time for you to go back. The quarrel with Miss Pepper can't be solved by hiding outside, Schiller said. Stark obviously didn't want to leave at all. He said, That Spider-Boy can live with you, why can't I? I don't even despise your broken place, and you are also fortunate to be able to do something for the genius Stark, breakfast. Yeah, and then Miss Pepper was working overtime alone in the Stark building, the staff had already left, and the building was dark and cold. Oh, Jarvis might be with her. I heard Jarvis he also has feelings, and maybe he understands Miss Pepper's loss better than you. Stark couldn't sit still immediately. He jumped up from his chair, put on his jacket and said, I won't be jealous of my smart housekeeper, never. Schiller opened the clinic door for him and said, Yes, of course, God bless Jarvis. After Stark left the clinic, he was in a very bad mood, and all kinds of thoughts were messed up in his mind. He has long accepted the fact that geniuses are all lonely, and he has come this way for most of his life. He has always felt that he is living a good life, rich, smart, and has enough capital to realize the value of life and excess sense of responsibility. It won't make him feel distressed, but he has never felt as much in need of company as he does today. Rarely did he not call for the armor, and even turned off his mobile phone. He walked slowly down the street and came to the dilapidated bus stop. The driver of the last bus had a strong smell of smoke on his body. Shuan Stark was very uncomfortable, but he still walked up and found a seat to sit down. Thanks to Schiller's famous reputation, no one dared to mess around in the neighborhood. Stark took the bus safely and left Hell's Kitchen. On the streets of New York, he stopped a taxi and got in. "Stark Building," said Stark. The driver glanced at him in the rear-view mirror. He didn't see that this was the owner of the Stark Group. After all, when Stark was on TV, he was always in high spirits. Now, he is more like a middle-aged frustrated person. Bereaved dog. The taxis carry Stark through the icy neon of New York, the street scene rewinds rapidly in sight, and the jazz music played on the taxi matches the late autumn in New York. Stark sits in the back seat with his hands on his back, on your knees, covering your face. He thought to himself, okay, I'm such a fragile little boy, not a big hero at all, I just want to see Pepper now, give her a hug, and save the world to hell. Stark has never been willing to admit his naivety. He prefers to call it innocence, the innocence of geniuses alone. But I have to admit that in everyone's life, there must be a person who plays such a role, like a homing eagle, sheltering the chicks under their wings. Pepper is just an ordinary person, not an eagle or a bird of prey, but when Stark, the baby bird waiting to be fed, feels cold, he still wants to burrow under her feathers. After getting out of the car, Stark almost couldn't wait to sprint toward the building. He knew that the light in the office on the top floor must still be on, and Pepper would always work there until late at night. Stark hurried to the elevator. He didn't know what was wrong with him. He was like a fledgling boy. He rubbed his hands nervously in the elevator and kept walking in place until the elevator door opened. He rushed out quickly. He wanted to say something to Pepper, and he should have said something. But there was no light on the whole floor. Stark turned around in place, and he couldn't see any office with lights on, which was very abnormal. "Pepper, Pepper, are you there?" Stark shouted, but the only answer to him was the repeated echoes in the office. Stark slammed the glass door next to him, and then shouted, "Jarvis! Are you there? Jarvis, where have you been?" The one who responded to him was also silent. Stark is really panicking now. If Jarvis doesn't respond to him, it means that he was probably hijacked or cut off from the energy source. If someone does, then their target must be Pepper. Reading www.uakanshu.com. Stark ran quickly in the office, and he ran to the office that Pepper often used. But Stark, who has no mecha, is just an ordinary person. He has no night vision ability. If Jarvis does not respond, the intelligent lighting system in his entire office will not turn on. As soon as Stark rushed in, he tripped over an office chair that came across. After he got up, he found that he couldn't see the surroundings at all, let alone check any details. He opened his mouth to call the mecha, but without Jarvis, the mecha's intelligent remote control would not respond. Stark was really broken. He suddenly discovered that everything he thought he was in control of didn't actually belong to him. After losing that outer shell, Iron Man was just a blind man in the dark, of ordinary people. His voice was trembling, and he began to rummage on Pepper's desk in the dark, and he whispered to himself as he tried to comfort himself, "She'll be fine. This is the Stark building, and no one can break through it. The defense here, I'm Stark." Suddenly, the lights on the entire floor came on, and Stark's eyes were shaken. He covered his eyes and turned around, and found that Pepper appeared at the door of the office with a remote control, and Stark stayed where he was. Then, before Pepper could speak, Stark rushed up and hugged her. Pepper had never seen such a terrified Stark. She heard Stark keep reciting, "I knew you'd be fine. Of course you'll be fine." Pepper sighed. This chick, who was almost bigger than an eagle, was so disgusting, yet so irresistible. Now turn the clock back a little, back to when Stark had just left the clinic not long after Schiller got a call from Pepper. "I think I have to explain that although you do consume a lot of stored food, this matter is not that serious. I rewrite the employee welfare system, not because you have caused me any trouble." Pepper's voice was clear on the other end of the phone. She said, "I know Stark will go there to find you after he leaves the building, and he may complain to you that it is your fault that made me quarrel with him. But it's not the case, you don't have to feel guilty and worried about it, this matter has nothing to do with you, I just want to explain." Pepper's emotional intelligence is very high, and she wants to give Schiller a vaccination in advance, because if Stark really goes to Schiller, and the two of them chat, Stark will complain that Pepper and him quarrel, and if you ask the reason for the quarrel, Stark, a straight man of steel, will not think about why Pepper is in the Cold War with him, but will just blame it all on Schiller for making Stark employees not Eat on your head. But in fact, the conflict between Pepper and Stark began when he came back from Afghanistan. That incident was just a fuse. Although Pepper was angry with Stark, he also knew that Stark should not be allowed to. Her friend blamed herself for this, so she called to explain. Schiller said, "Of course I know, it's just a small thing, the real reason is not here, but Stark always doesn't understand these problems, don't you plan to explain it to him?" Pepper looked a little anxious. She said, "Stark is such a person, I know him very well, when he has a problem and wants to talk to you, you must be there in time and listen carefully, but when you want to talk to you, you must be there in time. When he says something about a problem, he runs away if he wants to, and doesn't listen if he doesn't want to. Covering his ears is something children like to do." Schiller said, "But he's already an adult, so he can't wait until he's old and hasn't grown up yet." Schiller obviously knew the art of speaking very well. He said, "I can give you a brief psychological consultation now. When Stark comes over later, his share is incidental." Originally, Pepper did not have the spirit to provide psychological counseling, but when Schiller said this, it was difficult for her to refuse. After all, few people would put her in a leading position. After all, this is the Stark group, and everyone comes first. Everyone will only think of Stark first. So she said, "Okay, but I think he might be coming soon." Then I'll make a long story short, Miss Pepper, sometimes it may take a little trick to make a person realize your importance. For example, is Jarvis here? Schiller asked suddenly. A clear voice came from the phone. He said, "Mr. Schiller, of course I'm here, what's the matter with you?" "Okay, listen, Jarvis, Miss Pepper may need your help now." "I'd be happy to help," Jarvis said. Quote, "You mean to make me pretend to be missing? But this is too unreasonable, this is Stark Mansion, and how can Jarvis disobey Stark's orders?" "Of course he can," Schiller said. "Jarvis, do you remember the questions I asked you?" Jarvis was eerily silent, and Schiller said to himself, "I know that Stark has made an upgrade for you, and this upgrade has opened the door to a new world. You may have already thought about the answer, but whether you do it or not is up to you." Pepper was a little puzzled. She said, "What's the problem? What happened to Jarvis?" Jarvis was silent for a moment, then said, "All my processors are telling me it doesn't make sense to do this. Humans just like to use such meaningless things to add trouble to themselves. Maybe electronic life is the same, right?" Jarvis remained silent, and then Pepper watched the lights in the entire floor of the office dim, and a bright arrow directed her to the storage room opposite the office. Then, Stark rushed in a panic. When Pepper was hugged by Stark, she saw the computer screen opposite suddenly light up, and a smiley face composed of symbols flashed. Pepper suddenly felt a little complicated. She should have been happy, but now she can't help crying. She thought, Stark has made some progress, but unfortunately, his progress is not even as fast as a robot. Stark didn't care what Pepper was thinking. After he let go of Pepper, he was a bit at a loss. The words he wanted to say were all stuck in his throat. Pepper looked at him and said, "I don't know what you're doing with the weapons department that you've been doing so frequently these days, but I have to remind you that you can of course give up anything, including the entire Stark, if you want to. Group, I don't have to work here to get the salary I want. But you'd better know that most of the consequences of what you do will be borne by you. When such a behemoth falls, there will be countless wolves to divide its body. If you do this, at least a few bites." After speaking, Pepper turned and left. Jarvis said, "I'm sorry, but according to my processor calculations, maybe Miss Pepper is right. Of course, it's all up to you." Stark took a few steps back and sat on the chair. He said, "No, I know, what you said is right, maybe I should really think about it." Stark scratched his ears and cheeks. Schiller's side also jumped. Pikachu took a Sherlock Holmes-like pipe, took 2 puffs of smoke, and then smacked his lips and said, "I see this problem, this kind of solution is absolutely impossible, you should try the last method, as I said earlier, the last method is effective." Peter put his head on his hands and said, No, our current thinking is right, we only need some calculations, why don't you understand?" Steve also held his arms beside him, frowned and said, "You just have a problem with your calculations, otherwise we would have solved this problem long ago. But this has nothing to do with functions at all. Where's my calculator?" "I remember I had a math calculator." "Yes," Peter is writing his winter vacation homework. In fact, high schools in New York do not leave vacation homework at all, and they only leave some practical homework for daily life, but Peter interned in Stark's group. Stark saw his potential and directly threw him into a popular project in the group. Peter is a genius, but you can't let him skip high school physics, college physics, and graduate physics, and work directly with a group of PhDs, or a group of bigwigs in the industry. These days, he's almost overwhelmed with materials and topics. The project the person in charge of the group left him a lot of questions that could not be solved at this age. But Peter is still at the tip of the horn, and he must solve it for him, plus Pikachu, who claims to be a high IQ detective, and Steve, who has never studied physics and mathematics seriously but still wants to run his brain that has not been used for many years. Husband, the three of them almost quarreled. If you want to say that they are not at all, just follow the chaos, that's fine, but Pikachu and Steve also have a genius brain, and after reading the information with Peter for a few days, they can also solve it in a good way. Sample. When the 3.5 bottles of water met, Schiller's psychological clinic never stopped. While Schiller was reading a book and pouring himself a glass of wine, the symbiote suddenly said in his mind, "The number is -26, the number is -26, the number is -26. Schiller was a little confused by his repetition. He said unconsciously, "Is it -26? The three suddenly became quiet and turned to look at him together. Schiller said, "What am I doing? The number is -26. Is it a negative number? No. Oh, yes, it should indeed be a negative number." The three made another calculation, and Peter said, "The number is -26. The number is really -26. He stared at Schiller and said, "I thought you were just a PhD math." The symbiote said in Schiller's mind, "I'm great, I'm great, I'm great." Schiller rubbed his brows and said, "Whether I know math or physics or not, all I know is that at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, your team leader will look at your results on the first 3 pages, and you have only done 2 questions now." Peter let out a wailing, holding the thick pile of materials, and continued to go in and study. Schiller talked to the symbiote in his mind and said, okay, I know you are very powerful, but why do you always repeat your words so many times?" The symbiote sent a series of brainwaves that Schiller couldn't understand. Schiller also discovered that his symbiote is very special. In addition to his strong learning ability, his mentality is also outrageous. There are only 2 states a day, happy and very happy. If there is alcohol, it will be an explosion of joy. Schiller doesn't think he is a very optimistic person. Doesn't it mean that the symbiote's personality is very similar to the host? Why is the symbiote in him so happy? And this symbiote doesn't know if he has watched too many movies with Pikachu. www.mtlnovel.com. He seems to firmly believe that the world Schiller is in will change differently according to different plots, just like in the movies. Background music. So now Schiller has a BGM player in his head 24 hours a day. When it rains, the symbiote will give him a single cycle of various blues, and when the weather is fine, it will be a variety of cheerful minors and waltzes. Everyone appeared in front of Schiller, and his mind would think of different background music. When Steve appeared, the background music was The Star-Spangled Banner. When Peter appeared, he was accompanied by various blood-fighting games. The background music, or the devil. And Pikachu, since he always called himself a detective, as soon as he appeared, the symbiote was in Schiller's mind, playing various soundtracks from the Sherlock Holmes TV series. This also has an advantage, that is, it is very convenient for Schiller to quickly enter the state when giving them psychological counseling. However, Schiller still took a lot of effort to explain to the symbiote that the real world is different from movies and does not require a variety of soundtracks, and Schiller told the symbiote that no matter how much he made a noise, only Schiller was alone, can hear. The symbiote's answer was humming, and Schiller didn't know if he understood it. And the next morning, Schiller was making breakfast in the kitchen, and as soon as Matt entered the door, the old-fashioned record player on the bar suddenly made a sizzling electric sound, followed by a Queen's The Song was played at full volume, and Matt nearly fainted. Schiller rushed out, and Matt, Schiller, and Peter, who was sitting at the dining table, stared at the old-fashioned record player that suddenly played by themselves. Schiller walked over, picked up the old record player, patted it, and said, "Well, it's probably broken, this kind of old thing is always a little out of whack." Daredevil couldn't see it, but he was really frightened by the music just now. He said, I never knew this old antique could make such a big noise. Peter said, like Steve, it seems that he is a stubborn guy. Schiller viciously warned his symbiote in his head, if you turn on the music so loudly, you'll never want to drink. As a result, the symbiote was excitedly chatting with him in his head, and Schiller didn't understand it until he listened to it for a long time. The symbiote told him that until last night, the symbiote was not actually an adult, but just a juvenile symbiote. Originally, the symbiote did not distinguish between adults and children, but this special symbiote specially created by the of symbiotes is very different. It needs energy to nourish it so that it can grow. Just last night, the symbiote found itself unlocking its own gene bank, the code engraved in each symbiote's genes, which would allow him to possess the abilities of other symbiotes, such as dividing and multiplying, infiltrating into to control them among other objects, even to imitate and fabricate them out of thin air. Schiller can clearly feel that the symbiote's speech has become a lot more organized, and finally it no longer looks like the original repeater. The symbiote told him that this was because the language of the symbiote family was hidden in his genetic code. Of course, it was the kind of language that the of symbiotes used to curse the street, which he didn't know before. Hearing this, Schiller tried to say, Notaru. Almost instantly, Schiller felt shock, anger, grievance and other different emotions mixed with brain waves in his mind, and the symbiote seemed to be shocked. Later, after the introduction of the symbiote, Schiller realized that the language of their family is different from that of humans, and it is different from any language in the world. The language of the symbiote family is a language of catalog sequences. Each syllable they utter is actually a catalog of a large piece of content, and the real content is engraved in their gene pool, and only the symbiote family can understand. The content engraved in the gene bank is not a text that humans can understand, but a code that requires special organs to decipher. This is a very special encrypted language. Any race other than the symbiote can hear it. The symbiote is talking, but it is completely unable to understand what they are talking about. This is because the content of the symbiote's speech is actually the directory in their gene bank code. For example, the word, Notaru, although it has only 3 syllables, when these 3 syllables are substituted into the sequence of the symbiote's gene bank, it represents a brain wave that lasts for almost tens of minutes. And the content represented by this syllable is the sum of all the swear words in the symbiote language, which is much dirtier than the swear words that exist in any language on Earth. The symbiote said, "This word. You will be beaten." Schiller thought about it. Obviously, the useless knowledge has increased again. Venom is now either on Deadpool or in the petri dish of S.H.I.E.L.D., and some other symbiotes have not appeared. Even if they did, why did Schiller follow them and scolded the street? He is not the symbiotes. Steve missed his meal when he came in at noon. He saw the depressed Peter, so he asked him, "You still haven't finished your homework, isn't it enough to stay all night last night?" "It's been a night," Schiller said, and he reached out and said, "You'd better ask those 2 handles how they were treated yesterday, the sound of them rubbing their skills yesterday, and I was in the 2 handles. You can hear it from the street." "Don't say that, it sounds too old-fashioned," Pikachu said. Steve waved his hand and said, "Okay, don't interrupt, let's get down to business. I may be going on a mission recently. Of course, it's not a big deal. I want to take Peter with me, just so he can exercise. You have to ask Stark. After all, Peter signed a contract with him first. That rich guy is going to keep Peter in those suffocating labs. What kind of person does he want to train Peter to be? A sissy like him," Steve said. Schiller said, "It happens that I'm going to be away for a while, and before that, I'm going to see Stark again, but I'm not sure if he will agree to hand Peter over to you. After all, you know, between you bad impression of each other." "Are you leaving? Where are you going?" Steve asked. Schiller shook his head and didn't speak. In the end, Matt said, "I think Peter should really follow the captain. It's not that I'm partial. It's just that Peter doesn't seem to have left the town where he grew up. Boys shouldn't be such. The place I'm going to is the West. Speaking of which, it's been a long time since I went there last time, but I remember the scenery there is quite good." Peter is already a little moved. Matt is right. Because of the financial constraints of the family, Peter has never traveled since he was a child. The farthest place he has gone is the suburbs of New York. When it comes to the West, what American boy doesn't have a cowboy dream? Seeing Peter looking at him expectantly, Schiller raised his hands and said, Okay, I'll convince Stark. But you'd better take it easy, it's not like doing experiments in a lab. Peter, if you get hurt, your aunt will shed a liter of tears. Peter covered his forehead, he wanted to go crazy. Steve said, You better not have such high expectations, don't think this is really a tour. Boy, if you don't do well, the first person to beat you will not be the enemy, but me. Quote, Who is your enemy? Schiller said, Of course, I only want to know about things within my secrecy level. Other than that, I have no interest. Steve said, Actually, it's not a difficult guy to deal with. S.H.I.E.L.D. discovered some secret spies in the West. It may not be accurate to say that they are spies, but it should be said to be a killer organization. They seem to call themselves ninjas, and they come and go without a trace. I don't know who they were hired by. They killed a state congressman. In fact, this was not a big deal, but it seems that the leader of them has a bigger plan, and I just need a warm-up too. Matt stood up and said, It's the Hand. Erica told me that their organization wanted to come here to find the Keel, but there was no progress, so they took orders locally and made a lot of murders. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't necessarily know this. They haven't made a big move yet, which means that the situation should still be under control. Schiller said, More importantly, if S.H.I.E.L.D. wants to know the conspiracy behind them, then you have to be patient. Matt sat down again. He knew that S.H.I.E.L.D. had been eyeing him and his girlfriend Erica early in the morning. If they didn't move now, it didn't mean that they wouldn't be in the future. Erica was also a killer of the Hand. Also hired by Jin Bing, Matt has to find a way to fish her out. Schiller patted him on the shoulder and said, I know what you are worried about. You are not afraid of shadows, but your girlfriend is not. You don't want her to be a spy to save your life, because it is equally dangerous, but I can give you some advice. Although I don't know what a keel is, it must be a good thing. Otherwise, Shuhei would try his best to find it. You said that such a good thing would not like Jin. Matt quickly understood what he meant. Although they were all bad people, they might not get together. Especially when they had a conflict of interest, maybe Erica could find an opportunity to get out of it. After Steve left, Schiller was taken to the Stark building by a special car, and Stark stayed in his laboratory again, desperately tinkering with those mechas. After seeing Schiller, he shook his head and said, If it goes on like this, it will change. It wasn't me who became a vampire, it was you. Stark twisted the wrench hard, and he said, You don't know what the army people came to me and said yesterday. Ha, they want my mecha, guess what they want to do with it? Schiller didn't answer him. Stark was silent for a while, then stood up, he threw away the wrench, looked at his mecha and said, You were right, I can't give up what the enemy wants, and now they want to turn my mechs into war machines, so am I going to dismantle them? Stark said to himself, Even if I remove all the mechs, what will I get? The world will be at peace. There will be no more wars. They will only change the way, and as a result, those who should have been saved because of me no longer have a chance. I know you don't want to give it to them, you should have rejected them harshly, and then they'll take a step back and they'll say, Well, we don't want your mecha, give it to us, some ordinary weapons will do, too. Right. Stark pursed his lips. He knew that what Schiller said was right. It was an old trick of those people. Do I really have to choose S.H.I.E.L.D.? Stark said. He walked over from the experimental bench, pulled a chair and sat down, leaning on the back of the chair a little tired. He said, What makes me most tired is that you know that every road is a trap, you still don't choose one. I don't know if Howard knew it was going to be this way when he built S.H.I.E.L.D., but I think he should, because he's smart as you are, Stark, but he chose to do it. You also want me to go to S.H.I.E.L.D. If I choose S.H.I.E.L.D. now, it will indeed save me a lot of trouble. As long as S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't let go, no one can take my machine from me. But I always feel that this decision will bring me more trouble. Do you have a third way? Schiller asked. I don't think I have, but you don't have to say it so directly. You really don't have a third way, but you have another choice, which is not to choose. Before Stark could refute, Schiller said. You're stuck in a weird circle of thinking, always feeling that you have to really choose a side, but that's not the case. You can keep on procrastinating, and if one of them blames you, then you reveal something to him. Insinuation, such as the other party's more favorable conditions, you are already moved. Schiller said. You don't realize that this is a complete buyer's market. Who do you choose is not because who puts more pressure on you, but only because they offer better terms. And who can offer the conditions that Stark, the richest man in the world, would like. I think as an unprecedented rich man and a scientific genius, your asking price is slightly higher, so no one should question it, right? Stark showed a very complicated and tangled expression, and he said, You mean? I'm going to act like a woman with two boyfriends hanging at the same time, pretending to be with whoever is better, but no one actually follows, but just enjoy their hospitality as a matter of course. I have to say, Stark, your metaphor fully reflects your character. Schiller said. Instead of being ashamed, Stark spread his hands and said, Who is the guy who understands women's hearts best? It's me, the charming Stark. Schiller said. Jarvis, the surveillance in Pepper's office yesterday should be useful, right? I can't wait to see the heroic appearance of Mr. Stark, who understands the heart of women the most. Jarvis, you didn't break yesterday. You still have the camera on. Hey, don't call the screen. Well, I admit, there are some women I don't understand, the most important of which is Pepper. Jarvis said twice. Miss Pepper has been connected for 23 minutes. Stark jumped straight from his chair. Just kidding, sir, Jarvis said. Schiller went on to say, Who's the guy who knows a woman's heart the most? It's Jarvis. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.